We think we know the ocean. We've mapped its surface, charted its currents, named its creatures. We've sent submarines down into trenches so deep that sunlight becomes only a memory, a rumour from another world. And yet, for all our technology and all our exploration, the ocean remains profoundly unknown. 70% of Earth's surface lies beneath salt water, and we have seen less than 5% of what exists in those depths. The rest is darkness. The rest is silence. The rest is mystery. But some have wondered if that darkness is truly empty. Some have asked if that silence is really unbroken. Because scattered through the records of naval vessels and coastal communities, through the logbooks of fishing boats and the debriefings of submarine crews, there exists a strange and persistent thread of testimony. Stories of objects that move beneath the waves in ways that shouldn't be possible. Lights that glow in the midnight depths where no light should exist. Shapes detected on sonar that appear, linger, and vanish without explanation. Craft, perhaps, or intelligences, or something for which we have no adequate name, moving through the hidden sea with purpose and speed that defies everything we believe we understand about what lives below. These are not UFOs, or rather, they are something else entirely. Unidentified submerged objects, USOs. The ocean's own mystery, separate from the sky but perhaps connected to it in ways we've only begun to suspect. Because while the world has spent decades watching the heavens for signs of visitors from beyond, something has been moving through our oceans with equal strangeness and far less attention. And the deeper we look, the more we find evidence that the ocean may not be the empty wilderness we imagine, but a highway, a habitat, a home to something that was here long before us and may remain long after. The modern story of USOs begins, as so many mysteries do, with the military. During the Cold War, when American and Soviet submarines prowled the depths in a silent game of cat and mouse, sonar operators began reporting contacts that made no sense. Objects moving at speeds no known submarine could achieve. Targets that descended to depths that should have crushed any human-made vessel into twisted metal. Acoustic signatures that matched nothing in any database, nothing built by human hands or known to human science. In 1963, during naval exercises off the coast of Puerto Rico, multiple vessels detected a single object moving through the water at impossible speeds. It travelled from the surface down to depths exceeding 20,000 feet, depths where the pressure measures in tons per square inch, where the darkness is absolute and the cold is crushing. And then it rose again, as if the physics that govern everything we know simply did not apply to it. The object maintained speeds estimated at over 150 knots, faster than any torpedo, faster than any submarine, faster than almost anything human technology has ever achieved underwater. And it did this not for moments, but for hours, tracked by multiple ships, recorded by multiple sonar systems, witnessed by trained naval personnel who knew exactly what their equipment could and couldn't detect. They called it the Ghost, they catalogued it, they filed reports, and then, as often happens with such things, the reports were classified, filed away, and the world moved on. But the ocean did not forget, and the sightings did not stop. There's something deeply unsettling about the idea of an intelligence in the ocean. The sky feels vast and empty, a place where we might imagine visitors arriving from distant stars. But the ocean is here, surrounding us, beneath every ship that crosses it, below every swimmer who enters it. The ocean is part of our world, part of our planet, intimate and immediate. And if something unknown dwells there, something that moves with technology we cannot match and purpose we cannot fathom, then it has been our neighbour all along, closer than the stars, older perhaps than our cities, watching us from below as we've gazed upward, searching for meaning in the heavens while ignoring the mystery in our own depths. Some researchers have noted a pattern. USO sightings often occur in the same locations where UFOs have been reported emerging from or descending into the ocean. Witnesses along coastal regions have described glowing objects that rise from the water without spray or disturbance, lifting into the night sky as if gravity were merely a suggestion. Others have reported craft that descend from above and slip beneath the waves with barely a ripple, disappearing into depths from which they do not emerge, or from which they emerge hours or days later, miles away, tracked intermittently by confused radar and sonar operators who cannot reconcile what their instruments are telling them. The implication is strange and elegant. Perhaps what we've been calling visitors from space are not visitors at all, but residents. Perhaps the ocean is not a barrier, but a home, a place of concealment and operation for intelligences that have no need to travel light years to reach Earth, because they've been here all along, moving through liquid corridors we cannot follow, observing us from a medium we've barely begun to understand. There's a name that surfaces again and again in these accounts: the Shag Harbour incident. In October of 1967, on the coast of Nova Scotia, multiple witnesses watched a large object with 4 lights descend from the sky and crash into the waters of Shag Harbour. The Canadian Coast Guard responded. Local fishermen rushed to the scene. They all saw the same thing: something glowing beneath the surface, something large, moving slowly through the dark water, leaving a trail of strange yellow foam in its wake. Divers went down. They found nothing: no debris, no wreckage, no bodies. But Royal Canadian Navy vessels detected sonar contacts moving along the ocean floor, heading northeast toward the Atlantic. For days, military ships tracked something beneath the waves, something that eventually disappeared near a submarine detection base, as if it knew exactly where it was going. As if the crash had not been an accident or a malfunction, but a controlled descent, a return home. The incident was investigated, reports were filed, and like so many such events, the details became fragmented, the witnesses scattered, the evidence classified or lost. But the story persists because it speaks to something fundamental about the mystery of USOs. They are not simply objects that happen to be underwater. They seem to belong there. They move through the ocean with confidence and knowledge, navigating depths and distances that suggest familiarity, purpose, perhaps even territory. And then there are the trenches, those vast tiers in the ocean floor where the Earth's crust pulls apart or pushes together, creating canyons so deep that Mount Everest could be placed inside them and still not reach the surface. The Mariana Trench, the Puerto Rico Trench, the Java Trench, places where sunlight has never reached, where the pressure would instantly kill any surface creature, where the temperature hovers just above freezing and the water is so still it might as well be stone. We know almost nothing about what exists in these places. We've sent down cameras and unmanned submersibles, captured glimpses of pale, eyeless creatures that drift through the black like forgotten dreams. But the trenches are vast beyond comprehension, miles deep and hundreds of miles long, and our explorations have been brief, limited, like shining a flashlight into an infinite cave and believing we've seen everything there is to see. Some naval officers, speaking privately years after their service, have described sonar contacts in the deepest trenches. Massive objects, they said, that appeared and disappeared on instruments, that seemed to rest on the ocean floor and then rise without warning, ascending thousands of feet in seconds. There are stories of submarines detecting what sounded like machinery, or voices, or something between the two, echoing up from depths where nothing should exist except silence and slow-moving fish. Stories that were never officially reported because the officers knew how they would sound, knew that speaking of such things could end a career or invite ridicule. But the stories exist. They circulate quietly among those who've spent time in the deep ocean, among submariners and sonar technicians and naval researchers who've stared at screens in dark rooms and seen things that made no sense. And if even a fraction of these accounts are accurate, if even 1 in 10 of these witnesses is describing something real, then the trenches may not be empty wilderness at all, but gateways, or bases, or homes to something that has learned to thrive where we can barely survive. There's a feeling that comes from contemplating the deep ocean. It's not quite fear, though fear is part of it. It's more like recognition of our own smallness, our own ignorance. We are surface creatures. We breathe air. We require light. The ocean in its deepest places is as alien to us as the surface of Mars or the moons of Jupiter. And yet it's here, surrounding us, covering most of the planet we call home. We've spent billions reaching for the stars while the greatest mystery on Earth lies beneath us, patient and hidden, waiting in the dark. If something intelligent moves through that darkness, if something has built a civilization or established a presence in the depths we cannot reach, then we are not alone in the way we've always imagined. The question is not whether life exists in the universe. The question becomes whether life exists in our own ocean, watching us, perhaps studying us, moving beneath our ships and our cities with technology that makes our submarines look like children's toys. It's a humbling thought, and it's a thought that becomes harder to dismiss the more we examine the evidence, the more we listen to the witnesses, the more we consider the sheer vastness and strangeness of the ocean itself. Because the ocean keeps its secrets well. It swallows evidence. It erases tracks. It offers only glimpses and whispers and the occasional sonar contact that appears for a moment and then fades into static. And perhaps that's exactly how something down there prefers it. Perhaps the ocean is not hiding them from us. Perhaps they are using the ocean to hide themselves, dwelling in the one place on Earth where we cannot easily follow, cannot easily observe, cannot easily threaten whatever it is they've built or whatever it is they're doing. And so we begin this descent together, this slow drift into the mystery of the hidden sea. We'll explore the sightings and the incidents, the strange encounters, and the unexplained phenomena. We'll consider the possibility that Earth's oceans are not empty, that the deep is not dead, that something moves through the darkness with intention and intelligence. We'll follow the trail of lights and shapes and impossible speeds, down through the water column, past the sunlight zone, past the twilight zone, into the midnight waters where pressure becomes crushing and cold becomes absolute. We'll ask questions that have no easy answers. We'll consider possibilities that challenge everything we think we know. And we'll do so with wonder, with curiosity, with the recognition that the ocean is vast enough to hold secrets we've never imagined and old enough to have kept those secrets since long before we walked on land. The water is deep. The darkness is patient. And somewhere below, something waits, or travels, or watches. Something that knows the ocean far better than we ever will, moving through corridors of water and stone that we've barely begun to map, in a world that exists alongside ours but remains forever separate, forever hidden, forever strange. Let's descend together, slowly, carefully, and see what we might find in the depths. The ocean has stories to tell if we're willing to listen. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let those stories carry you down, down into the hidden sea, where the real mystery has always been waiting. Chapter 2. The Silent Highways Beneath. If you watch the ocean long enough, patterns begin to emerge. Not in the waves or the tides, which follow the pull of the moon and the turning of the earth, but in something else, something beneath. Fishermen have known this for generations. Certain waters, they'll tell you, feel different. Certain stretches of sea seem to hum with invisible activity, with a presence that can't quite be named but can definitely be felt. And when you begin collecting reports of unidentified submerged objects, when you spread them across maps and mark the locations and the dates, something curious happens. The sightings cluster. They repeat. They form lines and corridors across the ocean floor, as if whatever moves down there is not wandering aimlessly but travelling with purpose, following routes that have been established over time, perhaps over centuries. These are the silent highways beneath, the hidden roads that crisscross the depths, connecting points we don't understand for reasons we can only guess at. And along these routes, year after year, decade after decade, witnesses report the same phenomena. Objects that glow as they pass, shapes detected on sonar that move too fast and dive too deep, disturbances in the water that have no natural explanation. All of it suggesting not random encounters with the unknown, but traffic, movement, a network operating in the dark below us, as consistent and deliberate as any highway system on land. The Catalina Channel, between the California coast and Santa Catalina Island, has been the site of repeated USO activity for more than 70 years. Fishermen working these waters have described glowing discs rising from the depths, ascending slowly through the dark water, before breaking the surface and lifting silently into the night sky. Some witnesses have reported seeing multiple objects, moving in formation, their lights pulsing in patterns that seemed coordinated, intentional. Others have told of strange disturbances beneath their boats, of sonar readings that showed massive shapes moving below, shapes that tracked alongside their vessels for miles before descending into blackness. In one account from the early 1990s, a commercial fishing boat was working the channel in the hours before dawn when the crew noticed their instruments behaving strangely. The depth finder was showing the bottom far closer than it should be, and then far deeper, fluctuating wildly as if something enormous was passing beneath them, rising and falling through the water column. When they looked over the side, they saw light. Not the diffuse glow of bioluminescence, but focused beams, like searchlights sweeping through the water below their hull. The lights moved with them for nearly 10 minutes, and then, without warning, shot downward and disappeared, leaving only darkness and the normal depth readings returning to the screen. The crew reported the incident to the Coast Guard. They were told it was probably a school of fish, or perhaps the lights from another vessel reflected strangely through the water. But the fishermen knew what they had seen, they knew their instruments, and they knew that no school of fish produces focused beams of light that descend vertically at high speed into the abyss. Similar patterns emerge in the Puerto Rico Trench, that vast underwater canyon in the Atlantic where some of the deepest water on Earth plunges more than 5 miles below the surface. Naval vessels operating in this region during training exercises have repeatedly detected sonar contacts that behave unlike anything in their databases. Fast-moving objects that appear at depth, travel in straight lines for miles, and then either vanish from instruments entirely or descend beyond the range of detection. Some of these contacts have been tracked by multiple ships simultaneously, ruling out equipment malfunction or misinterpretation. The objects are real, they're there, and they're moving with what appears to be purpose and navigation. One particularly striking incident occurred during NATO exercises in the late 1980s. Several destroyers were conducting anti-submarine warfare training when their sonar arrays began picking up multiple targets moving through the trench at speeds exceeding 70 knots. At first, the operators assumed they were tracking torpedoes, but the contacts were too large, too sustained, and they were travelling in formation, maintaining consistent distances from each other as they moved. The ships followed the contacts for nearly an hour, watching them navigate the contours of the trench with precision, turning at what seemed like predetermined points, never deviating from their course. Then, all at once, the contacts accelerated. The sonar operators watched in disbelief as the objects increased speed to over 120 knots and descended vertically, straight down into the deepest part of the trench, disappearing from detection in a matter of seconds. No known submarine can move at those speeds. No underwater vehicle humans have ever built can sustain that kind of acceleration, and certainly nothing we've created can dive to those depths without being crushed into fragments by the pressure. The incident was logged, reports were filed, and like so many such encounters, it was eventually classified, filed away in archives where curious researchers would find only redacted pages and vague references to unexplained sonar contacts. But the witnesses remember, the sonar operators who watched those screens remember, and they know that what they tracked that day was not human technology, not natural phenomena, but something else entirely, something that travels the Puerto Rico Trench as if it owns the place, as if those dark waters are home territory. There's a theory, whispered among certain researchers and retired naval officers, that these routes correspond to geological features, underwater ridges, seamounts, volcanic vents, and especially the deep trenches that scar the ocean floor. The theory suggests that whatever moves through the depths is not simply travelling from point A to point B, but navigating along natural highways formed by the Earth's own structure. Perhaps these features provide something necessary, something we don't understand. Energy from volcanic activity, mineral resources, or simply cover the deepest, darkest places where detection is least likely and observation is impossible. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, that massive underwater mountain range that runs like a spine down the centre of the Atlantic Ocean, has been the site of numerous USO reports. Research vessels working along the ridge have recorded acoustic anomalies, strange sounds that don't match known biological sources or geological activity. In some cases, these sounds have been accompanied by visual sightings of lights deep below, moving along the contours of the ridge, following its curves and valleys as if tracing a familiar path. In the Pacific, the Emperor Seamount Chain, that string of underwater mountains stretching from Hawaii toward Japan, shows similar patterns. Fishing vessels working these waters have reported unusual sonar returns, objects that seem to move along the seamounts at consistent depths, travelling from one mountain to the next as if hopping between waypoints. Some witnesses have described seeing glowing objects breach the surface near these seamounts before diving again, disappearing into the depths like whales, but moving far faster than any whale, far more deliberately. And then there are the trenches themselves, the Mariana, the Tonga, the Java, the Peru-Chile. These vast canyons where the Earth's crust bends and breaks, where volcanic activity simmers in the darkness, where the deepest waters on the planet pool in silence. If you are something that wished to remain hidden, to move unseen, to establish bases or habitats away from human observation, the trenches would be ideal. They're virtually unexplored. They're impossibly hostile to surface life, and they're connected by patterns of ocean current and geological structure that could serve as natural navigation routes for anything that truly understands the ocean's geography. Some researchers have attempted to map the sightings to create charts showing where USO activity is most concentrated. What emerges is not random scattering, but clusters and lines, hotspots where reports accumulate over decades, corridors where sightings occur repeatedly along the same general routes. It looks, in a strange way, like a transportation network, like infrastructure. And if that's what it is, if these silent highways are real and established, then the implications become profound. Because infrastructure suggests permanence, it suggests organization. It suggests that whatever is down there has been operating in our oceans long enough to develop systems, to establish territories, to create what amounts to civilization in the depths. Consider the logistics of such a thing. To maintain regular routes across vast distances, you need reliable technology. You need navigation systems that work in total darkness, under crushing pressure, in waters that would destroy anything fragile or poorly designed. You need craft capable of speeds far exceeding anything humans have achieved underwater. And you need a reason, a purpose, trade perhaps, if such a concept applies, communication between distant locations, transport of resources or personnel or whatever it is that such beings might need to move from place to place. Or perhaps the routes serve another function entirely. Perhaps they're patrol paths, monitoring stations, observation points from which to watch the surface world without being detected. Perhaps what we're seeing is not transportation but surveillance, a deliberate and ongoing observation of human activity from below, tracking our ships and our submarines and our fishing fleets as they move across the ocean's surface, recording our behaviour, studying our technology, remaining always just out of reach, just beyond confirmation. There's something deeply unnerving about the idea of being observed from below. When we look up at the night sky and wonder if we're being watched, there's a certain abstraction to it. The distances are vast. The watchers, if they exist, are far away. But the ocean is immediate. It's beneath every ship. It's below every coastal city. The depth between us and whatever might be down there is measured not in light years but in feet, in fathoms, in miles at most. And if something is using the ocean as a highway, travelling routes that bring them near our shores, our harbours, our submarine bases, then they're close. They've always been close. They're our neighbours in a way that's both intimate and profoundly alien. Naval officers have described encounters where submarines detected contacts that seemed to be following them. Not aggressively, but persistently, matching course and speed, staying just at the edge of sonar range. In some cases, these contacts followed subs for hours, through manoeuvres and course changes, as if studying them, learning their capabilities. And then, when the submarine would attempt to close the distance or change depth to get a better read, the contact would suddenly accelerate and vanish, diving to depths no human vessel could follow, demonstrating capabilities that made the submarine feel like a slow, primitive thing by comparison. These encounters are rarely discussed publicly. They're classified, or they're dismissed, or they're simply forgotten because acknowledging them raises questions that have no comfortable answers. But privately, among those who've experienced such things, there's a recognition. The ocean is not empty, and we are not alone down there. Something shares those waters with us, something that moves with confidence and technology we cannot match, along routes we're only beginning to suspect exist. The fishing communities of the Pacific Northwest have stories passed down through generations. Old fishermen will tell of certain waters that should be avoided at night, not because of storms or rocks, but because of the lights. Glowing shapes that rise from the depths and move beneath boats, sometimes following them for miles. Some of these fishermen speak of areas where their equipment consistently fails, where compasses spin uselessly and depth finders show impossible readings. They've learned to avoid these spots, to give them a wide berth, because strange things happen there. Nets come up empty even in waters that should be rich with fish. Engines fail for no reason and then restart just as mysteriously. And always, there's the sense of being watched, of something below paying attention, taking note. These stories are dismissed as superstition, as the natural tendency of human beings to find patterns in randomness, to attribute intention to coincidence. But when you hear the same stories from different communities separated by hundreds of miles told by people who've never met each other, you begin to wonder. When fishermen from Alaska describe the same phenomena as fishermen from Chile, When Norwegian trawler captains tell stories that mirror accounts from Japanese fishing fleets, the dismissals become harder to maintain. Something is creating these patterns. Something is active in multiple oceans, across vast distances, behaving in ways that are consistent enough to generate similar reports from independent witnesses all over the world. And the routes, those silent highways beneath, may be the answer. If there's a network down there, if certain paths are travelled regularly, then it makes sense that witnesses would report activity in the same general areas over and over. The objects aren't appearing randomly. They're travelling specific routes for specific reasons, and sometimes, inevitably, those routes bring them close enough to the surface, close enough to human activity, that they're detected. We catch glimpses, we record encounters, and then they're gone again, descended back into the depths where we cannot follow, where they can continue whatever it is they're doing in peace and darkness. There's a question that haunts these accounts. If these highways exist, where do they lead? What are the destinations? Are there gathering points, bases, habitats in the deepest trenches where multiple routes converge? Are there specific locations of interest, geological features or resources that draw repeated visits? Or are the routes themselves the point? Endless patrols or circuits that serve purposes we can't even imagine because we don't understand what such beings might need or want or value? Some have speculated about thermal vents, those cracks in the ocean floor where superheated water rich in minerals pours up from the Earth's interior. These vents support ecosystems of their own, strange communities of tube worms and blind shrimp that thrive in conditions that would kill most surface life. Perhaps whatever moves through the deep is drawn to these vents for similar reasons. Perhaps they provide energy, or raw materials, or simply environments where alien biology can exist more comfortably than in the cold, still waters of the abyss. Others have suggested the trenches themselves are the destinations, that the deepest places on Earth are not barriers but doorways, access points to something deeper still. The notion sounds like fantasy, but consider what we actually know about the deep ocean. We've mapped the surface of Mars in more detail than the floor of our own oceans. We've sent rovers to other planets while leaving the Mariana Trench largely unexplored. It's entirely possible that something exists down there that we've never detected. Structures or openings or habitats that remain invisible to our limited surveys because we simply haven't looked closely enough or in the right places. The ocean keeps its secrets. It swallows light. It distorts sound. It makes observation nearly impossible below certain depths. And if something intelligent understands this, if something has adapted to these conditions over time spans we can barely comprehend, then they could have entire civilizations down there, entire networks of activity and infrastructure, and we would never know. We would catch only these glimpses, these fleeting encounters along the highways where their world occasionally brushes against ours. And so the pattern continues. Year after year, new reports filter in from the same general regions. The Catalina Channel, the Puerto Rico Trench, the waters off Norway, the Pacific Seamount chains, the deep trenches of the Western Pacific. Each report is investigated if it can be, dismissed if it can't be, and then filed away. But the accumulation of these reports, the consistency of the locations, the similarity of the descriptions, all of it points to something real and ongoing. Not random phenomena, not mass hallucination, but activity, movement, traffic along routes that have been established for reasons we don't understand by intelligences we haven't confirmed. The silent highways are there, beneath us, invisible but persistent. And whatever travels them moves with purpose, with technology, with an understanding of the ocean that far exceeds our own. They navigate in darkness. They withstand pressures that would destroy us. They travel at speeds we can't match. And they do all of this quietly, carefully, remaining just beyond our ability to fully document or confirm, letting us catch glimpses but never quite enough to prove beyond doubt what's really down there. Perhaps that's intentional. Perhaps they are avoiding us deliberately, using their knowledge of the ocean to remain hidden while still operating freely in their own domain. Or perhaps they're simply indifferent. Perhaps they move along their highways the way we drive our roads, unaware or unconcerned that sometimes, occasionally, someone spots them from above. Someone catches a sonar contact or sees a light where no light should be. Someone files a report that joins thousands of others in archives and databases, creating a pattern that speaks to mysteries we're only beginning to recognize. The ocean is vast, the highways are long, and somewhere in the darkness something continues to travel, continues to move along routes as old as the trenches themselves, as persistent as the currents, as mysterious as the deep itself. We are surface creatures bound to light and air. But below us, in the silent highways beneath, another world exists. Another kind of life moves through the water with confidence and purpose. And every so often, for just a moment, our worlds intersect. A light in the darkness, a shape on sonar, a moment of wonder and unease. And then the depths close again, and the travellers continue their journeys, and we're left above, on the surface, wondering what we saw and where they were going, and whether the ocean will ever reveal its secrets, or if some mysteries are meant to remain hidden, travelling forever along highways we can barely detect, in a world that exists alongside ours but remains forever separate, forever strange, forever just beyond our reach. Chapter 3. Encounters in the Dark Water. There's a difference between knowing something exists and meeting it face to face. You can read reports, study data, examine patterns on maps, and still maintain a comfortable distance from the mystery. But when you're actually there, when you're on the water in darkness and something impossible rises from below, all that distance collapses. The mystery becomes immediate. It becomes real in a way that changes you. And those who've had these encounters, who've witnessed the impossible moving through the deep water, they carry something in their eyes afterward, a recognition, an understanding that the world is far stranger than most people will ever know. These are the stories of those moments, the close encounters, the times when the hidden sea revealed itself, briefly, to witnesses who happened to be in the right place, or perhaps the wrong place, when something from the depths decided to surface, to travel near the boundary between water and air, to make itself known in ways that could not be explained away or forgotten. The crew of the Soviet submarine designated K-429 had an encounter in the North Pacific that was classified for decades and only emerged in fragments after the Cold War ended. They were running deep, conducting patrol operations in waters where American and Soviet vessels played their endless game of detection and evasion. The sonar operator detected a contact below them, not above, which is where they expected threats. Below. Deeper than they were, deeper than any submarine should be able to operate. The contact was massive according to the reports that eventually surfaced, larger than their own vessel, and it was ascending, rising through the water column at a speed that seemed impossible for something of that size. The captain ordered evasive maneuvers, but the object adjusted its course to match theirs. It stayed below them, tracking them, rising slowly as if examining the submarine from beneath. The crew could hear it through the hull, a deep thrumming sound that resonated through the metal, through their bones, a vibration that felt less like machinery and more like something alive, something breathing in the depths. For 20 minutes the object followed them. The sonar operator watched his screen with growing fear as the contact maintained perfect position beneath their vessel, matching every turn, every depth change. And then, without warning, it accelerated. The crew felt the submarine shudder as something passed beneath them at tremendous speed, creating turbulence that rocked the vessel despite the tons of water surrounding them. The sonar showed the object racing away, descending at an angle that would have been suicide for any human craft, dropping thousands of feet in seconds before disappearing from their instruments entirely. When they surfaced hours later, the captain filed a report. He described the contact as unlike anything in his experience, unlike any submarine or marine animal known to exist. The report was classified immediately. The crew was debriefed and told not to discuss the incident. But years later, after the Soviet Union dissolved and records began to emerge, fragments of that report surfaced, and it became clear that K-429's encounter was not unique. Soviet submarines had been detecting and tracking such objects for years, had been having encounters that defied explanation, had been operating in an ocean that was far more mysterious and far more inhabited than official records ever acknowledged. On the surface, encounters take a different form. In 1994, a luxury yacht travelling from San Diego to Cabo San Lucas had an experience that the crew still refuses to discuss publicly, though the story has circulated privately among maritime communities. They were crossing open water on a calm night, the ocean like dark glass under starlight, when the water around them began to glow. Not the soft blue-green of bioluminescent plankton, but a brighter, whiter light that seemed to emanate from something large moving beneath the hull. The captain cut the engines. The crew gathered on deck, staring down into the illuminated water. They could see a shape below, massive and disc-like, keeping pace with the yacht even though the yacht had stopped moving. The object was perhaps 50 feet in diameter, smooth and metallic looking through the water, and it hovered there for several minutes, its light pulsing slowly, rhythmically, like breathing or like a heartbeat made visible. One of the crew members grabbed a camera and tried to photograph it, but the light was too bright, too diffuse through the water. The images came out as white blurs, useless as evidence. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the object moved. It shot forward beneath the yacht, its light trailing behind it like a comet, and descended at an angle so steep it seemed to be falling. Within seconds the glow faded to a pinpoint and then vanished entirely, leaving the crew in darkness on still water, wondering if what they'd just witnessed had been real, or some kind of shared hallucination brought on by exhaustion and too much time staring at the ocean. But they all saw it. They all felt the strange electric quality in the air while it was there, that sense of presence, of being observed by something that was deciding whether to reveal itself fully or remain hidden. And they all agreed afterward, without speaking about it directly, that they had encountered something that did not belong to the human world, something that moved through the ocean with purpose, and intelligence and technology that made their expensive yacht feel like a primitive raft by comparison. Not all encounters happen at sea. Some occur at the boundary between ocean and land, in harbours and coastal waters where human activity is dense and observation is theoretically easier. In 1991, residents of a small fishing village on the coast of Argentina witnessed something that would divide their community for years afterward, between those who believed and those who chose to explain it away. It was late evening, just after sunset, when people began noticing lights in the harbour. At first they assumed it was a boat with unusual lighting, perhaps a research vessel or a fishing trawler with new equipment. But the lights were underwater, and they were moving in ways that boats do not move. They were darting back and forth, circling, diving and rising, performing manoeuvres that looked almost playful, as if whatever produced them was exploring or testing the harbour's depths. A crowd gathered on the waterfront. Someone called the Coast Guard, and for almost an hour dozens of witnesses watched as 3 separate lights moved through the harbour water, occasionally surfacing briefly before submerging again, creating patterns of disturbance on the surface that looked like they were being made by solid objects, but objects that moved far too quickly to be any known marine animal. At one point the lights arranged themselves in a triangular formation and began moving in synchronized patterns, like a choreographed display. They would dive together, rise together, separate and converge. And then, all at once, they accelerated. The water erupted in 3 separate places as the objects burst upward, and witnesses reported seeing disc-shaped forms lift clear of the harbour for just a moment, water streaming from their surfaces before they tilted and dove back down, disappearing into deeper water beyond the harbour mouth. The Coast Guard arrived to find nothing. No debris, no unusual readings on their instruments, no explanation for what the crowd had witnessed. The official report categorized it as unexplained natural phenomena, but the villagers knew what they had seen. They had watched something perform in their harbour, something that moved through and above water with equal ease, something that seemed almost to be showing off, demonstrating capabilities that existed beyond human technology or natural biology. Some encounters are more intimate, more personal. A diver working on underwater pipeline repairs off the coast of Norway described an experience that haunts him still. He was at depth, perhaps 80 feet down, working in murky water where visibility was limited to a few feet in any direction. The work was routine, mechanical, something he'd done hundreds of times. And then he felt it, a change in the water, a sense of presence. He looked up and saw light approaching through the murk. Not the focused beam of another diver's lamp, but a diffuse glow that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, growing brighter as something large moved toward him. His first thought was whale, but the light was wrong, and whales don't glow. His second thought was submarine, but the movement was too fluid, too organic. And then the object emerged from the murk, passing perhaps 20 feet above him, and he saw it clearly. It was disc-shaped, he said later, smooth, metallic but not reflecting light in the way metal should underwater. It seemed to absorb and emit light simultaneously, as if it were its own source of illumination. And it was moving, gliding through the water without any visible means of propulsion, without sound or turbulence, as silent as a thought. The diver hung suspended in the water, watching it pass, unable to move, unable to think, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were showing him. The object moved past him and continued on, descending at a shallow angle, growing dimmer as it moved deeper. He watched it until it disappeared completely into the darkness below, and then he surfaced immediately, breaking protocol, ascending too fast, not caring about decompression because he needed to be out of the water, needed to be away from whatever he'd just seen. He filed a report with his supervisor. He was sent to a company psychologist who suggested stress and nitrogen narcosis. But the diver knew what he'd seen. He knew that his instruments had been working perfectly, that his mind had been clear, and he knew with absolute certainty that something impossibly advanced had passed within yards of him, something that moved through the ocean's depths with the casual confidence of a creature in its natural habitat. He never dove again. He found other work. Because knowing that such things exist down there, he said, makes the ocean feel different, makes it feel like you're always being watched, always being allowed to be there by something that could appear at any moment from the darkness. Military encounters are often the most detailed because of the instruments involved, the multiple witnesses, the strict protocols for observation and reporting. In 2004, the USS Princeton, an Aegis cruiser equipped with some of the most sophisticated radar and tracking systems in existence, detected objects off the coast of San Diego that would eventually become known as the Tic Tac incident. But what's less well known is that the aerial objects detected that day were observed by the Princeton's crew to have emerged from the water. The radar showed them rising from the ocean's surface before accelerating to heights and speeds that seemed impossible. What the official reports often omit is what else the Princeton detected that day. Underwater contacts that corresponded to the aerial sightings. Sonar operators reported massive objects beneath the surface in the same areas where the aerial phenomena appeared. Objects that were moving at depths and speeds that matched no known submarine or marine animal. Objects that seemed to be waiting beneath the water, and when the aerial craft approached the surface, these underwater objects would rise to meet them, as if there were coordination between them, as if the aerial visitors and the submerged objects were part of the same operation, the same system. One sonar operator, speaking anonymously years later, described watching his screen as one of these underwater objects ascended from extreme depth. It came up from below the thermocline, where sonar penetration is difficult, rising steadily until it reached the surface zone, and then it simply vanished from his screen, not by diving again, but by leaving the water entirely. The operator switched to surface radar, and there it was, an aerial contact accelerating upward, tracked by the Princeton's sophisticated systems as it climbed to 40,000 feet in a matter of seconds. The implication was clear, but rarely stated directly in official reports. Whatever was in the air that day was also in the water. The boundaries between ocean and sky seemed meaningless to these objects. They moved through both mediums with equal ease, suggesting technology so advanced that the physics governing our vehicles, our aircraft and submarines, simply did not apply. And if that's true, if these encounters represent technology that can transition seamlessly between water and air, then the distinction between USOs and UFOs becomes almost meaningless. They're the same phenomenon, observed in different mediums, but originating from the same source, operating under the same impossible principles. There's a psychological weight to these encounters that's difficult to convey. The witnesses often describe feeling small, insignificant, confronted with something so far beyond human capability that it makes our proudest achievements feel like children's toys. Naval officers trained to remain calm in crisis situations have admitted to feeling fear during these encounters, not the rational fear of a known threat, but something deeper, more primal. The fear of encountering intelligence that regards you the way you might regard an insect. Present, perhaps mildly interesting, but ultimately inconsequential. A submarine captain, retired now and willing to speak more freely, described an encounter in the North Atlantic where his vessel detected and tracked an object for more than 2 hours. They tried everything, changed depth, changed course, increased speed, slowed to near stop, and through it all, the contact maintained position with them, adjusting instantly to every maneuver they made. It was, he said, like being shadowed by something that could read their intentions, that knew what they were going to do before they did it. Eventually they gave up trying to evade it. They simply continued their patrol with the object following at a distance, and the captain found himself thinking strange thoughts. He wondered if this was how the object always operated, if every submarine in these waters was being followed and simply didn't know it because the object chose to remain undetected. He wondered if his vessel had ever truly been alone in the deep ocean, or if every patrol, every mission, every moment underwater had been observed by something that chose when to reveal itself and when to remain hidden. When the object finally departed, it did so with shocking speed. One moment it was there on sonar, the next it had accelerated beyond tracking range and disappeared into the depths. The captain filed his report. He was told not to discuss it, and he carried the memory of those hours for the rest of his career, that sense of being watched, being studied, being allowed to operate in waters that belonged more to the unknown than to any human nation. What links all these encounters is the sense of purpose they convey. These are not random appearances. These are not animals following instinct or natural phenomena following the laws of physics. These are craft, objects, intelligences, whatever term we choose to use, and they're operating with clear intention. They observe, they follow, they perform maneuvers that suggest testing or demonstration. They appear in locations that seem significant, near military vessels, near harbours, near underwater geological features that might hold importance we don't understand, and they choose their moments carefully. Most encounters happen at night, in conditions of limited visibility. Most happen in deep water, far from shore, where witnesses are few and documentation is difficult. When they occur in more populated areas, like that harbour in Argentina, they're brief, quick enough that by the time anyone thinks to grab proper recording equipment, the moment has passed. It's as if whatever's down there understands how to remain just on the edge of confirmation, real enough to be witnessed, elusive enough to be denied. But the witnesses know. They carry the memory of those encounters like a secret, like knowledge that sets them apart from others who've never seen what they've seen. They know the ocean is not empty. They know that beneath the surface something moves with intelligence and technology that makes our presence in the water feel temporary, permitted, observed by something that has been there longer and will remain there longer, watching from the deep as we pass above, occasionally revealing itself just enough to remind us that we are not the dominant intelligence on this planet. We are visitors in the ocean, and the true residents, whatever they are, move through the dark water with a confidence that speaks of home, of belonging, of a presence that predates our maps and our names, and our certainty that we understand the world we inhabit. The encounters continue, new reports filter in each year, and those who've witnessed these moments, those who've met the mystery face to face in the dark water, they understand something that can't quite be put into words. They understand that wonder and fear can exist together, that seeing something impossible doesn't always bring clarity, but often brings only deeper questions, and that the ocean, that vast dark expanse covering most of our world, holds secrets that may never be fully revealed, mysteries that prefer to remain hidden, surfacing only occasionally to remind us that for all our technology and all our exploration, we are still strangers in the deep, still learning that the waters beneath us are far more complex, far more inhabited, and far more strange than we ever imagined. Chapter 4. The Glowing and the Living. Light in the deep ocean is a language, a signal, a message written in photons against the absolute darkness of the abyss. Down there, where sunlight cannot reach, where the pressure would crush human bones into powder, creatures have learned to make their own light. Anglerfish dangle glowing lures to attract prey, jellyfish pulse with bioluminescent rhythms, whole schools of lanternfish create constellations in the midnight waters, flickering on and off in patterns that serve purposes we still don't fully understand. The deep ocean glows with life, with chemistry, with the cold fire of organisms that have turned darkness into opportunity. But sometimes, the light that appears in the depths is different, brighter, more focused, moving in ways that bioluminescence does not move. And when witnesses describe these lights, when they try to explain what they've seen rising from below or passing beneath their vessels, they struggle with vocabulary, because the light seems wrong for machinery, too alive, too organic. But it also seems wrong for biology, too bright, too controlled. It exists in some strange space between the mechanical and the living, between craft and creature, as if the distinction itself might not apply to whatever moves through the hidden sea. A marine biologist working off the coast of New Zealand described an encounter that challenged everything she thought she understood about deep-sea life. She was in a submersible, descending to study squid populations in the twilight zone, that layer of ocean where the last blue traces of sunlight fade into permanent darkness. At around 1,500 feet, she began seeing lights in the distance. Small at first, pinpoints like stars, but growing larger as her submersible descended. She assumed they were bioluminescent jellies or perhaps a school of lanternfish, but as she drew closer, she realized the lights were too large, too bright, and they were moving in formation. There were 7 of them, she counted, arranged in a pattern that seemed deliberate, geometric. They hovered in the water column, pulsing gently, and she noticed that the pulses were synchronized. All 7 would brighten together, then dim together, like breathing, like a heartbeat shared across multiple bodies or multiple sources. She maneuvered the submersible closer, excited, assuming she was witnessing some unknown species exhibiting collective behavior. But when she got within perhaps 50 feet, the lights responded to her presence. They moved, not randomly, not with the drift of current or the panic of prey, but with coordination. They shifted formation, spreading out into a wider arc, positioning themselves around her submersible as if observing it from multiple angles. Her scientific excitement began mixing with something else. Unease. She was looking at behavior that seemed intelligent, deliberate. These lights were responding to her like minds might respond, like something was making decisions about how to approach this strange metal sphere that had entered their domain. She turned on the submersible's external lights to get a better look, and in that moment of illumination, she saw them. They weren't fish. They weren't jellies. They weren't any biological form she recognized. The objects producing the light appeared metallic, but with a surface that seemed to shift, to ripple, as if solid and liquid at the same time. They were roughly disc-shaped, perhaps 6 feet in diameter, and the light emanated from their entire surface, pulsing from within like they were made of luminous material rather than carrying lights as equipment. She watched them for perhaps 2 minutes, her hand hovering over the controls, uncertain whether to stay or ascend. And then, as if reaching some collective decision, the objects broke formation. They moved past her submersible, so close she could have reached out and touched them, if not for the pressure hull between them. And she saw, or thought she saw, that their surfaces were not just reflecting her lights, but responding to them, changing colour slightly, as if mimicking or communicating or simply reacting in ways that seemed more biological than mechanical. They descended below her, moving in that same synchronized formation, and their light gradually faded as they dropped deeper into the abyss. She tried to follow, but her submersible had depth limitations, and they did not. The last she saw of them was a faint glow far below, like distant stars sinking into an ocean of night, and then nothing. Just darkness, and the soft hum of her submersible's systems, and the knowledge that she had witnessed something that defied categorization, something that seemed to exist outside the neat boxes of living and non-living creature and craft. This quality of seeming alive appears again and again in witness testimony. People use words like organic to describe objects that are clearly technological. They talk about surfaces that look biological, that pulse or ripple or change in ways that metal and plastic should not change. Some have described craft that appear to breathe, expanding and contracting rhythmically as they move through the water. Others have reported seeing what looked like membranes rather than hulls, translucent surfaces through which light glowed from within, giving the impression of something with internal organs, with systems that functioned more like biology than engineering. A commercial diver working on oil rig supports in the Gulf of Mexico encountered something that still troubles him years later. He was at depth, perhaps 200 feet down, working in water that was murky with sediment. His lights cut through the gloom in narrow beams, illuminating only a few feet of visibility at a time, and then something large moved past him, blocking his lights briefly, casting him in shadow. His first thought was, shark. The Gulf has bulls and tigers, and a diver at depth is vulnerable. But when he turned to look, what he saw was nothing like any fish. It was elongated, perhaps 30 feet long, with a surface that seemed to glow faintly with its own light. But the glow was uneven, pulsing in waves along its length, like muscles contracting under skin, like peristalsis, like something digesting or breathing or pumping fluid through internal channels. The object moved past him slowly, and he noticed it was navigating around the rig supports with precision, avoiding obstacles as if it could see perfectly in the murky water. Its movement was fluid, almost serpentine, but there was no tail movement, no fins, nothing that explained how it propelled itself. It simply moved, gliding through the water as if friction did not apply, as if water were its natural medium in a way that transcended simple adaptation. He watched it disappear into the murk, and then he surfaced immediately, his work abandoned. When he described what he'd seen to his supervisor, he struggled with language. Was it a craft? Was it alive? The words felt inadequate because what he'd witnessed seemed to be both, seemed to exist in some category his language had no terms for. A machine that moved like a creature with surfaces that looked manufactured, something that blurred the boundary between technology and biology so thoroughly that the distinction lost meaning. There's a theory, discussed quietly among certain researchers who study these phenomena, that what we're encountering in the deep ocean is not technology as we understand it, but something that evolved along different principles entirely. Earth's biology follows certain patterns: cells, DNA, evolution through natural selection. But those patterns emerged from Earth's specific conditions, Earth's chemistry, Earth's history. If intelligence arose somewhere else, under different conditions, there's no reason to assume it would follow the same patterns. And if that intelligence then developed what we would call technology, there's no reason to assume that technology would look like ours. Our technology is hard, metal and plastic, rigid structures built to contain and protect and function according to mechanical principles. We build craft that resist water, that seal out the environment, that create internal spaces where human beings can survive. But what if you didn't need internal spaces? What if you didn't need protection from the environment because you were adapted to it, native to it? What if your technology was grown rather than built, programmed through something like genetics rather than engineering, created through processes that looked more like evolution than manufacture? The deep ocean is home to creatures that already seem impossible by surface standards. Giant squid with eyes the size of dinner plates, fish that generate electricity, octopuses that can change their skin texture and colour to become invisible against any background, creatures that thrive at thermal vents where the water is hot enough to melt lead, breathing chemicals that would be toxic to surface life. The ocean has already demonstrated that biology can adapt to conditions we would consider impossible. So why not technology that's equally adaptive? Why not craft that are grown, or bred, or evolved, rather than assembled, that function through biological principles rather than mechanical ones? It would explain the organic appearance witnesses describe. It would explain why these objects sometimes seem to pulse or breathe or move in ways that look more alive than mechanical. It would explain the seamless transitions between water and air, the impossible speeds and pressures they withstand, because perhaps they're not withstanding these conditions at all. Perhaps they're native to them. Perhaps they evolved in the deep ocean the way whales did, but with intelligence, with purpose, with the ability to manipulate their environment, and eventually to create technology that looks like an extension of themselves rather than something separate. The lights these objects produce add another layer to the mystery. Bioluminescence in nature is usually blue-green, the colours that penetrate water most effectively, the wavelengths that evolution has found most useful for communication and hunting in the dark. But USO lights are often described as white, or sometimes colours that seem to shift and change, cycling through spectrums in patterns that don't match any known biological purpose. A research vessel working in the Mariana Trench captured footage in 2011 that was classified and then partially released years later after pressure from civilian researchers. The footage shows the deep ocean floor more than 6 miles down, recorded by a remotely operated vehicle equipped with cameras and lights. For most of the footage, there's nothing unusual, just the pale sediment of the abyssal plain, occasional glimpses of sea cucumbers and small fish adapted to the crushing pressure. But at one point in the recording, lights appear in the distance, multiple sources moving across the seafloor. The ROV's operators directed their vehicle toward these lights, and as they approached, the objects came into focus. They were perhaps 3 feet in diameter, roughly spherical, hovering just above the sediment. and they were glowing with light that cycled through colours, blue to green to yellow to red, repeating in sequence, each object synchronized with the others. The ROV approached within 20 feet before the objects reacted. They rose suddenly, ascending at speed that created clouds of disturbed sediment, and then they accelerated horizontally, moving away from the ROV and disappearing into the darkness beyond the camera's range. The entire encounter lasted perhaps 90 seconds. The footage was analysed extensively. The objects showed no signs of being fish or jellies or any known bioluminescent organism. Their movement was too controlled, too fast, too coordinated, and the colour cycling light pattern matched no natural phenomenon anyone could identify. What purpose would such lights serve at the bottom of the Mariana Trench? There's nothing down there to see them except whatever is producing them. No predators to warn off, no mates to attract. The light seemed almost decorative, or communicative, as if the objects were using visible light the way we might use radio signals, broadcasting information in wavelengths that happened to be perceivable to human eyes but weren't necessarily meant for observation. Some witnesses have described interactions with these lights that felt almost playful. A sailboat crossing the Caribbean at night encountered a glowing object that rose beneath them and then kept pace with their hull for nearly an hour. The crew watched it through the clear water, fascinated by how it matched their speed perfectly, adjusting instantly to their course changes. At one point, one of the crew members shined a flashlight down at it, waving the beam back and forth in the water. The object responded. Its glow intensified, pulsed several times, and then it began moving in patterns that seemed to mirror the flashlight's movement. Back and forth, circles, quick flashes. It was, the crew member said later, like it was playing with them, like it was curious about this light coming from above and was trying to communicate back using its own light. The interaction lasted several minutes, and then the object accelerated away, its glow fading to a pinpoint and vanishing into the depths. Was it alive? Was it a machine programmed to respond to stimuli? Was it something in between, something that had intelligence and curiosity, but expressed those qualities through means we don't have frameworks to understand? The crew debated this among themselves for the rest of their voyage, and never reached consensus. Because the experience defied easy categorization. It had felt like contact, like communication, but with something so fundamentally different from human intelligence that even the attempt to communicate revealed more questions than answers. The ocean has always been good at producing things that seem alien. We surface dwellers look at deep-sea creatures and sea monsters, see impossibilities. The gulper eel with its enormous hinged mouth, the viper fish with its needle teeth and light-producing photophores, the vampire squid that turns itself inside out when threatened. These creatures evolved under pressures and conditions so different from the surface that they seem like they belong to another world entirely, but they're still bound by the same basic biology as surface creatures. They still need food, they still reproduce, they still operate within the laws of chemistry and physics that govern all Earth life. What witnesses describe in USO encounters often seems to transcend even these fundamental rules. Objects that move without apparent propulsion, lights that burn without heat, surfaces that shift between solid and fluid states, speeds that should create cavitation and turbulence but somehow don't. It's as if whatever's down there isn't just adapted to the deep ocean, but exists in some relationship with it that we don't have concepts for, where the boundary between organism and environment, between technology and nature, has been erased or never existed in the first place. A submarine crew in the Pacific described detecting what sounded like singing. Not the songs of whales, which they knew well, but something else. Patterns of sound that rose and fell in rhythms that seemed structured, intentional, musical almost. The sounds corresponded with sonar contacts, large objects moving through the deep water, and the crew realized they were listening to the objects themselves, as if the craft or creatures or whatever they were produced sound as naturally as whales do, as if acoustics were part of how they functioned or communicated or simply existed in the ocean environment. The recording was analysed by acoustic specialists who found patterns in it, repetitions and structures that suggested intentionality, but no meaning they could decode. It was language, perhaps, or navigation, or something else entirely. But it reinforced the sense that what moves through the deep ocean is alive in ways that make the distinction between biological and technological meaningless. These things exist. They function. They move and respond and perhaps think and communicate. but they do so according to principles that might be as alien to us as we would be to them. There's a strange beauty to this possibility, that the ocean harbours not just unknown creatures but unknown categories of existence. That life and technology might merge in ways we haven't imagined because our own evolution separated these concepts, made them seem fundamentally different. We are biological beings who build mechanical tools. But what if intelligence arose that never made that distinction? What if from the beginning their technology was an extension of themselves, grown from their own biology, as natural as a whale's fin or a bird's wing? The glowing objects in the depths might be craft in the sense that they serve purposes and carry intelligence, but they might also be alive in the sense that they grow and adapt and perhaps even reproduce. They might be both and neither, existing in a state that our language stumbles over because we've never encountered anything like it before. And if that's true, if the hidden sea is home to intelligences that blur every boundary we've established between natural and artificial, between creature and machine, then the implications reach far beyond simple confirmation of other life. They suggest that life itself is more diverse, more strange, more varied in its expressions than we've ever imagined. We think we understand what it means to be alive. We have definitions, criteria. We can point to a whale and say alive, and point to a submarine and say not alive, and feel confident in those distinctions. But in the deep ocean, where witnesses describe things that glow with their own light and move like creatures and respond like intelligences, those confident distinctions begin to dissolve. We're left with encounters that challenge our categories, that suggest the universe has forms of existence we don't have names for yet. Forms that might be common elsewhere but rare on our surface-oriented planet. And so the question transforms. It's no longer just what are they, but what does it mean to be alive? The glowing objects in the deep water, pulsing with rhythms that look like breathing, moving with purpose that suggests thought, responding to stimuli in ways that seem curious or playful or cautious, they force us to expand our understanding of what existence can be. They live in a realm we can barely access, function according to principles we don't understand, and express whatever consciousness they possess through means that look sometimes like biology, sometimes like technology, and most often like some synthesis of both that we have no framework to comprehend. The ocean glows with mysteries, not just with the cold light of bioluminescent creatures following ancient evolutionary paths, but with something else, something that seems to look back, that seems aware, that moves through the darkness with intention and intelligence. Whether we call them craft or creatures or something for which we need entirely new words, they're there, in the hidden sea, in the depths we've barely explored, glowing, living, existing in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about life, about intelligence, about the nature of existence itself. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the ocean, that vast unknown covering most of our planet, was always going to be the place where we discovered that our categories were too narrow, our definitions too limited. Perhaps the glowing things in the depths are not just mysteries to solve, but teachers, showing us that the universe is stranger and richer and more alive than we imagined, that existence takes forms we've never dreamed of, and that the darkness beneath us pulses with life that transcends our attempts to classify it, to understand it, to fit it into the neat boxes of known and unknown, alive and not alive, possible and impossible. The lights continue to move through the deep water, glowing softly in the endless night, and whether they're watching us or simply existing in their own strange way, they remain, pulsing like heartbeats in the dark, reminding us that the ocean is alive in more ways than one, and that some mysteries glow brightest when we stop trying to explain them and simply accept that they are. Chapter 5. Trenches, Gateways, and Hidden Depths. There are places on Earth where the planet itself seems to open, to pull apart, creating wounds in the ocean floor so deep that they defy comfortable comprehension. The trenches. Those vast canyons carved into the seafloor where tectonic plates meet, and one slowly grinds beneath the other, creating abyssal valleys that plunge miles below the surrounding ocean floor. The Mariana Trench, the Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, the Peru-Chile Trench. Names on maps that mark places almost no human being has ever visited, places where the pressure measures in the thousands of pounds per square inch, where the darkness is so complete that the concept of light becomes abstract, theoretical, a memory from another world. We know less about these trenches than we know about the surface of the moon. Our mapping is crude, our exploration minimal. We've sent down cameras and unmanned vehicles, captured brief glimpses of pale creatures drifting through the black, sediment plains that haven't been disturbed in millennia. But the trenches are vast beyond our ability to explore them thoroughly. The Mariana Trench alone is more than 1,500 miles long and averages 40 miles wide, dropping to depths that exceed 36,000 feet in places. To truly explore such a space would require thousands of dives, decades of work, resources we've never committed. And so the trenches remain largely unknown, largely unexplored, the deepest secrets on a planet we claim to understand. But some have wondered if that darkness, that crushing depth, that absolute isolation from the surface world might be exactly what something would want. If you were trying to remain hidden, to establish a presence on Earth without being detected or disturbed, the trenches would be ideal. They're virtually inaccessible, they're hostile to surface life, and they're connected by the ocean itself, by currents and geological structures that could serve as highways between distant locations, allowing movement and communication across vast distances while remaining completely hidden from observation. The deepest places on Earth have always attracted strange reports. Naval vessels operating near the Mariana Trench have detected sonar contacts that seem to emerge from the trench itself, rising from depths where nothing should exist except the most primitive life forms. In the 1990s, a research vessel mapping the trench's eastern wall picked up acoustic signatures that matched no known source. The sounds were rhythmic, pulsing, and they seemed to originate from multiple points along the trench wall, as if something was active down there at depths where the pressure would instantly kill any surface creature and crush any vehicle we've ever designed. The researchers recorded hours of these sounds, they analysed them, searched databases for matches, consulted with acoustic specialists and marine biologists. Nothing. The sounds didn't match any geological process. They didn't match any known marine animal. They were too regular to be random, too complex to be simple mechanical noise. And they came from places where we've never sent submersibles, places where the depth alone makes exploration nearly impossible with current technology. The recordings were filed away, added to the growing collection of unexplained phenomena associated with the deep trenches, curiosities that raise questions but provide no answers. What's particularly unsettling about these recordings is their location. They weren't detected in open water, where they might be attributed to distant sources or unusual acoustic propagation. They came from within the trench itself, from the walls and the floor, from the deepest parts of the deepest canyon on Earth. As if something down there was active, operating, functioning in an environment that should be completely inimical to complex activity. As if the trenches are not dead zones but habitats, or perhaps something else entirely. There's a pattern in the sightings of unidentified submerged objects. When you map them over time, when you look at where these encounters cluster, certain features emerge. And consistently, persistently, USO activity is concentrated near trenches. The Puerto Rico Trench sees repeated sightings, objects that descend to depths that should be impossible. The Japan Trench, where the Pacific Plate subducts beneath the North American Plate, has been the site of numerous encounters reported by Japanese fishing vessels and research ships. The Tonga Trench, one of the deepest places in the Pacific, shows similar patterns. It's as if the trenches serve as anchors, as centres of activity from which these objects emerge and to which they return. Witnesses describe seeing lights rise from the general direction of trenches, ascending thousands of feet before levelling off and travelling horizontally. Others report watching objects descend toward trenches at speeds that seem impossible, dropping at angles that would be suicidal for any human craft, disappearing into depths from which they do not emerge, or from which they emerge hours or days later, detected briefly on sonar before vanishing again. A submarine commander, retired from the Russian Navy, spoke in an interview years after his service about an experience near the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench in the North Pacific. His vessel was running deep, conducting routine patrol operations when sonar detected multiple contacts ascending from the trench. Large contacts, moving in formation, rising from depths that exceeded the submarine's crush depth by thousands of feet. The contacts climbed steadily, and the commander ordered his vessel to turn away, to distance themselves from whatever was rising from below. But the contacts adjusted their course. They followed the submarine, maintaining position beneath and behind it, matching its speed and depth changes with perfect precision. For more than an hour, the commander tried to evade these objects, tried every maneuver in his training, but they stayed with him effortlessly. And then, when his submarine finally crossed out of the trench's vicinity and entered shallower water, the contacts broke off. They turned back toward the trench and descended, dropping so quickly they disappeared from sonar in seconds, returning to whatever depths they'd come from. The commander filed his report. It was classified. He was instructed not to discuss the incident. But the memory stayed with him, the sense that his submarine had entered territory that belonged to something else, and that something else had escorted them out, had made it clear that they were being watched, being tracked, being allowed to leave. The trench, he said, felt like a border, a boundary, and whatever lived on the other side had defenders, or residents, or perhaps just an awareness that intruders had entered their space. The geology of trenches is violent and strange. These are places where the Earth's crust is literally being destroyed, where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another in a process called subduction. The friction generates earthquakes, the pressure and heat cause volcanism, and along the trench walls there are features we're only beginning to map: caves and overhangs, fault lines and fractures, areas where the rock has been twisted and folded by tectonic forces into formations that create pockets and chambers, spaces within the Earth's crust that exist at depths we can barely imagine. Could something use these spaces? Could intelligence, if it were adapted to the conditions or possessed technology that made adaptation unnecessary, establish habitats within the trench walls themselves? The rock would provide protection, shielding from detection. The depth would ensure isolation. And the volcanic activity common to subduction zones might provide energy, heat, resources that something could harness or utilize. It sounds like speculation, like science fiction. But consider what we know about life on Earth. We've found bacteria living in rock miles beneath the surface. We've discovered ecosystems thriving at hydrothermal vents where superheated water pours from cracks in the ocean floor. We've learned that life adapts to conditions we once thought were absolutely impossible. So why not intelligence? Why not technology designed to function in extreme environments, to utilize resources we don't recognize as useful, to thrive in conditions that would kill us instantly? The trenches could be gateways, not in the mystical sense, but in the practical sense. Access points to caverns or chambers within the Earth's crust, places where something might exist that we've never detected because we've never looked in the right places or with the right instruments. The Earth is not solid throughout. It has voids and pockets, places where water has dissolved rock, or where geological forces have created spaces. And in the deep ocean, at the bottom of the deepest trenches, some of these spaces might connect to the seafloor, might provide entry to a world beneath the world we know. There's a story told among deep-sea researchers, passed around in quiet conversations at conferences and in emails between colleagues who trust each other. It concerns a dive made in the late 1990s in the Japan Trench. An unmanned submersible was exploring a section of the trench wall, using cameras and sonar to map the geology. At a depth of approximately 24,000 feet, the submersible's sonar detected an anomaly in the rock face. What appeared to be an opening, a cave or tunnel entrance, large enough to accommodate the submersible itself. The operators directed their vehicle toward this opening. As they approached, the submersible's cameras captured images of the entrance, and what they showed was strange. The rock around the opening appeared too smooth, too regular. Natural caves in the deep ocean are typically rough, jagged, formed by random processes of erosion and geological movement. But this opening had edges that looked almost worked, as if they'd been shaped rather than simply formed by natural processes. The operators hesitated. They debated whether to send the submersible into the opening. Finally, curiosity won out, and they guided the vehicle forward. The submersible entered the tunnel, its lights cutting through darkness that had possibly never been illuminated before. The walls of the tunnel were smooth, the passage descending at a gentle angle deeper into the Earth's crust. The submersible followed this passage for several hundred feet, transmitting images back to the surface ship, and then something happened. The video feed showed a light ahead, not the submersible's own lights reflecting off rock, but light coming from deeper in the tunnel. A bluish-white glow that seemed to pulse slowly, rhythmically. The operators watched their screens transfixed as the submersible approached this light, and then, without warning, the video feed cut out. The telemetry went dead. All communication with the submersible ceased. They waited. They sent commands to surface to back out of the tunnel. Nothing. The submersible was gone, its tether apparently severed, its systems offline. The research vessel marked the location and eventually departed. Months later, a salvage operation was attempted, but the tunnel entrance could not be located again. The sonar maps showed no anomaly, no opening, just solid rock where the tunnel had been. The submersible was never recovered, and the researchers who'd operated it never spoke publicly about what they'd seen in those last images before the feed went dead. The story might be apocryphal, it might be exaggerated or entirely invented, but it circulates among those who work in the deep ocean because it speaks to a fear that's always present when exploring the trenches. The fear that you might find something that doesn't want to be found, that you might stumble into spaces that are occupied, that are protected, that belong to something that has no interest in being discovered. The Challenger, the deepest known point in any ocean, sits at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Only a handful of humans have ever visited it. James Cameron descended there in a submersible in 2012, spending hours filming the barren seafloor, capturing images of small amphipods and pale fish that somehow survive in conditions that seem absolutely hostile to complex life. But even Cameron's extensive exploration covered only a tiny fraction of the deeps area. He saw a few square miles of seafloor out of the thousands that exist at those depths, and between what we've seen and what remains hidden, there's vast opportunity for the unknown to exist undetected. Some researchers have noted something peculiar about the deepest dives. Sonar and acoustic sensors often malfunction or produce strange readings at extreme depths. Cameras capture images that show unexplained lights in the background, distant glows that appear in one frame and vanish in the next. Instruments detect magnetic anomalies that have no clear geological source. None of this is definitive. All of it could be explained by equipment stress, by the extreme conditions, by phenomena we don't fully understand. But it accumulates. It builds a picture of the deep trenches as places where strange things happen, where our instruments struggle to function and our observations become unreliable. What if that's intentional? What if something down there has learned to interfere with our senses, to create conditions that make observation difficult or unreliable? It wouldn't require sophisticated technology. Simple electromagnetic fields could disrupt compasses and electronic instruments. Acoustic generators could create interference patterns that make sonar readings ambiguous. Even the release of certain compounds into the water could affect camera optics or create distortions that make identification difficult. If intelligence wanted to remain hidden in the trenches, it would be relatively simple to create an environment where human observation becomes unreliable, where every instrument reading becomes questionable, where seeing is no longer believing because what you see might be generated or distorted. There's an old concept in ufology, the idea of underwater bases. It's been dismissed often as fantasy, as conspiracy thinking without evidence. But the logic is sound. If you're visiting Earth from elsewhere, or if you're native to Earth but non-human, where would you establish a presence? On land, you risk detection. In shallow water, you risk discovery by fishermen or coastal traffic. But in the deep trenches, at depths humans cannot easily access, in canyons so vast we've barely begun to map them, you could establish facilities that might never be found. You could operate for centuries, for millennia, completely undetected by surface civilization. The trenches offer more than just concealment. They offer resources, water, obviously in unlimited supply, minerals from hydrothermal vents, energy from geothermal heat, pressure that could be harnessed for various purposes, and they offer protection. Nothing we've built can survive at the bottom of the Mariana Trench for extended periods. Our submarines can't reach those depths. Our weapons can't function there. If something wanted to remain secure from human interference, the deep trenches are possibly the safest locations on the planet, and they're connected. This is crucial. The trenches aren't isolated pockets, but parts of a global system. Subduction zones circle the Pacific in what's called the Ring of Fire. They connect through deep water currents and geological structures. An intelligence that established itself in one trench could potentially access others, could create a network spanning continents, while remaining completely hidden beneath miles of water and darkness. The Earth's own geology provides infrastructure, and something that understands the deep ocean could use that infrastructure the way we use roads and shipping lanes, moving resources and information and perhaps themselves across vast distances through corridors we've never suspected exist. A geologist who studied the Peru-Chile Trench described finding something in sonar data that troubled him deeply. He was analysing mapping surveys, looking at the three-dimensional structure of the trench floor when he noticed regularities that shouldn't be there. Straight lines where natural features should be curved, right angles where geological processes create only random shapes, patterns that repeated in multiple locations along the trench, as if something had been constructed or modified rather than simply formed by natural processes. He brought his findings to colleagues. They suggested pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns in randomness. They suggested data artifacts, glitches in the sonar processing. They suggested everything except the possibility that what he'd found might be real, might be evidence of construction, or modification at depths where humans have never worked. Eventually he stopped pressing the issue. The data was filed away, and he moved on to other research. But privately he continued to believe that the patterns he'd seen were real, that something had left marks on the deep ocean floor, traces of activity that we've interpreted as natural, because the alternative is too unsettling to seriously consider. How many other researchers have found similar anomalies? How many have seen things in data that suggested artificial structures or modification, only to dismiss them because the implications are too radical? How many acoustic recordings sit in archives containing sounds that don't match any known source? How many video feeds from deep dives show lights or shapes in the background that have been explained away as reflections or equipment artifacts because acknowledging them as something else would require rethinking everything we believe about the deep ocean? The trenches guard their secrets well. They're too deep for casual exploration, too hostile for sustained observation, too vast to be thoroughly searched, and if something has been using them as habitat or hiding places for any significant period of time, they've had ample opportunity to learn how to avoid our limited observations, how to remain hidden in plain sight, how to exist in the one place on Earth where we simply cannot easily follow. And perhaps that's the answer. Perhaps the trenches are not gateways to somewhere else, but simply home. A place where intelligence adapted to pressure and darkness could thrive, could build, could exist without interference from surface dwellers who cannot survive in those conditions. We think of Earth as our planet because we live on its surface, because the air and the continents are accessible to us. But most of Earth is ocean, and most of the ocean is deep water, and the deepest places are the trenches. By volume, by area, the dark ocean vastly exceeds the lighted surface. So who really owns this planet? Who has the better claim? Those of us who walk on land and breathe air, or something that swims through the deepest waters, that calls the trenches home, that has existed in those dark places since long before we built cities, or sailed ships, or even knew that deep ocean existed? The question has no comfortable answer. We prefer to think of Earth as ours, explored and understood and conquered. But the trenches remind us how little we truly know. They represent the last great wilderness on the planet, the places where mystery still reigns, where the unknown is not a possibility but a certainty. And if those unknowns include intelligence, include technology, include civilizations that never developed on land but grew instead in the crushing darkness of the abyss, then we are not alone on Earth. We never have been. We've simply been living on the surface of a planet whose depths hold secrets we're only beginning to suspect. The trenches wait in darkness, patient and deep, holding whatever mysteries they hold. Perhaps they're gateways to deeper places still, to caverns within the Earth itself, where something has built cities or bases beyond our ability to detect. Perhaps they're simply homes, habitats where life took a different path than surface life, where intelligence arose in forms we wouldn't recognize, operating according to principles we don't understand. Or perhaps they're both and neither, existing in that strange space where our categories fail, where the questions we ask reveal how little we truly know about the planet beneath our feet. What's certain is this: the deepest places on Earth remain unexplored, unknown, mysterious in ways that should humble us. We've been to the moon. We've sent probes to the edge of the solar system, but we haven't been to most of the ocean floor. We haven't explored the vast majority of the trenches, and until we do, until we commit the resources and time and technology necessary to truly see what exists in those depths, we cannot say with certainty what's down there, what might be hiding in the dark, what might be watching from the deepest places as we pass above, confident in our knowledge, certain in our understanding, completely unaware that the greatest mysteries on Earth might be not out among the stars but below us, waiting in the trenches, ancient and patient and utterly hidden in the darkness that has always been their domain. Chapter 6. Visitors or Residents. There's a question that sits at the heart of every encounter, every sighting, every sonar contact that defies explanation. It's a question that sounds simple, but carries profound implications depending on how we answer it. Are they visitors or are they residents? Did they come here from somewhere else, travelling across the vast distances between stars to arrive at our ocean world? Or have they been here all along, native to Earth's waters, existing in the deep long before we walked on land, watching us evolve from some dark place beneath the waves where we never thought to look? The distinction matters. If they're visitors, then the ocean is a waypoint, a place to hide or refuel or observe before moving on. Earth becomes a destination in someone else's journey. Interesting perhaps, but temporary. But if they're residents, if they've always been here, then we're not alone on this planet in a way that changes everything. We share Earth with intelligence that predates our civilizations, that claims the oceans as territory, that has watched our entire history unfold from below while remaining hidden, patient, waiting in the depths that have always been theirs. Both possibilities are unsettling. Both suggest that our understanding of Earth and our place on it is incomplete. But they're unsettling in different ways, and as we consider the evidence, as we look at patterns in sightings and behaviours, as we think about what makes sense and what the ocean might hide, the question becomes not which answer is more comfortable, but which answer the evidence actually supports. The case for visitors seems straightforward at first. We have reports, consistent and credible, of objects that emerge from the ocean and ascend into the sky. Witnesses along coastlines have described glowing craft that rise from the water without spray or disturbance, lifting silently into the night before accelerating to speeds no aircraft can match. The USS Princeton incident involved objects that appeared to transition between water and air, tracked by radar as they rose from the ocean surface and climbed to altitudes where submarines certainly don't operate. If these objects can move seamlessly between ocean and atmosphere, then perhaps they're not ocean craft at all but spacecraft that use the ocean for temporary concealment. The logic is appealing. If you're visiting Earth from another world, the ocean offers perfect cover. It's vast and deep and largely unmonitored. You could park a fleet of ships in the Mariana Trench and no one would know. You could use the ocean as a base of operations, hiding beneath miles of water during the day and emerging at night to conduct whatever observations or studies you came here to perform. The ocean becomes a shield, protecting visitors from detection by primitive surface civilization while they go about their business in relative peace. And there's the connection to UFO reports. So many sightings occur near water. Coastal regions report disproportionate numbers of aerial phenomena. Ships at sea describe objects that descend from the sky and enter the ocean without slowing. The phenomena seem linked, as if the same objects are being observed in different mediums, suggesting that whoever operates them treats water and air and possibly space as simply different environments to navigate, boundaries that mean nothing to technology sufficiently advanced. But the more you examine this hypothesis, the more questions it raises. If they're visitors using Earth's oceans temporarily, why have the sightings been consistent for so long? Reports of strange lights and objects in the ocean stretch back decades, centuries even if you include maritime folklore. That's a very extended visit, and the behaviours witnesses describe don't always look like observation or study. They look like routine operations, like patrol routes, like something that knows these waters intimately, that navigates with confidence born of familiarity, that moves through the ocean not as visitors exploring new territory, but as residents travelling familiar ground. The case for residents requires a different kind of thinking, a willingness to consider possibilities that challenge our assumptions about Earth's history. We know that the oceans have existed for billions of years. We know that life arose in the oceans long before it colonized land. We know that intelligence evolved in the ocean at least once, in creatures like octopuses and dolphins that demonstrate problem-solving abilities and complex social behaviors. So why not intelligence that went further? Why not something that evolved in the deep ocean, adapted perfectly to that environment, and eventually developed technology without ever needing to come ashore? Consider the timeline. Modern humans have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. Civilization, as we define it, is maybe 10,000 years old. But the ocean has existed for over 4 billion years. Complex life has thrived there for hundreds of millions of years. In that vast stretch of time, with countless species evolving and adapting and competing, is it really impossible that intelligence arose more than once on Earth? That something else followed a different evolutionary path, one that kept them in the ocean rather than driving them onto land? We assume intelligence requires certain preconditions: hands to manipulate tools, fire to work metal, land-based civilization to develop technology. But those assumptions are based on our own path, our own history. A truly ocean-dwelling intelligence might develop technology through entirely different routes. Perhaps they learned to manipulate biology instead of mechanics, growing their tools instead of building them. Perhaps they harnessed volcanic vents for energy and heat without needing fire. Perhaps their technology looks organic to us because it is organic, evolved rather than invented, as natural to them as shells are to mollusks or webs are to spiders. And if such intelligence arose millions of years ago, if it established itself in the deep ocean while our ancestors were still small mammals hiding from dinosaurs, then they've been here far longer than we have. The ocean is their territory. We're the newcomers, the surface dwellers, who only recently learned to build ships and venture onto their domain. From their perspective, if they have a perspective we could understand, we must seem like children playing at the edge of a world we barely comprehend. There are hints in human mythology that suggest we've always known something was down there. Every maritime culture has legends of things beneath the waves, merfolk and sea serpents, monsters and gods that dwell in the deep. The Greek sailors feared Charybdis, the whirlpool that could swallow ships. The Norse spoke of the kraken, vast and tentacled, rising from the abyss. Pacific Islanders told stories of underwater kingdoms where spirits or gods made their homes, places where humans ventured at their peril. We dismiss these stories as superstition, as prescientific attempts to explain natural phenomena or to give form to the ocean's dangers. But what if some of these legends preserve memories of real encounters? What if ancient sailors really did see something impossible, lights in the water or shapes that moved with intelligence, and they described them in the only language they had, the language of myth and monster? The details may be embellished, but the core experience might be real, might be ancient testimony to the same phenomena modern witnesses describe, with sonar contacts and radar returns. There's a Japanese legend about a palace beneath the sea called Ryugujo, the Dragon Palace, where time moves differently than on the surface. A fisherman visits it and returns to find centuries have passed. It's folklore, obviously. But it speaks to an ancient belief that something exists below, something powerful and strange, operating according to different rules. And when you hear modern accounts of submarines detecting impossible objects in the ocean, of divers encountering craft that seem to bend physics, of sailors watching lights that emerge from the deep as if travelling between worlds, you wonder if the ancient stories and the modern sightings might be describing the same thing, separated only by language and technology, but pointing to a consistent mystery. The strongest evidence for the resident hypothesis might be the sheer consistency of the phenomenon across time and geography. USO reports don't cluster around recent decades as you'd expect if they represented new visitors. They stretch back through maritime history, appearing in naval logs and fishing boat records and coastal testimonies from every era we have documentation for. The technology we use to detect them has changed, evolved from visual observation to sonar to sophisticated acoustic arrays, but the core phenomena remain constant: objects that move too fast, lights where lights shouldn't be, shapes that don't match anything we've built or anything biological we know. That persistence suggests something stable, something established. Visitors might come and go, their presence fluctuating based on interest or need. But residents would be constant. They would always be there in the ocean, sometimes detected and sometimes not, but maintaining a steady presence because the ocean is their home, their territory, their world. And the patterns we see in the sightings, the routes that seem to connect trenches and seamounts, the concentrated activity in specific regions that remains consistent over decades, all of it looks more like the behaviour of established populations than temporary visitors passing through. There's also the question of adaptation. The objects witnesses describe operate at depths and pressures that would destroy any spacecraft we could imagine building. They move through water with efficiency that suggests perfect adaptation to that medium. They navigate in total darkness as if they can see, or sense, in ways we don't. Everything about their behaviour suggests they belong in the ocean, that they're designed for it, or evolved for it, that water is not an obstacle to overcome but their natural environment. Would visitors from space display that level of adaptation? Or does it suggest something native, something that has been in the ocean long enough to become perfectly suited to it? But then there are the sightings that complicate this tidy theory, objects that rise from the ocean and accelerate into space at velocities that would require technology far beyond anything Earth native would plausibly develop. If they're residents of Earth's ocean, why do they have capabilities suited for space travel? Why can they transition between water and vacuum as easily as they transition between water and air? Unless the resident hypothesis needs refinement, unless they're not residents in the sense that they evolved here, but residents in the sense that they've been here so long they might as well be native, established on Earth long before human civilization but originating from somewhere else, somewhere distant. Perhaps the answer isn't either or, perhaps it's both. They came from elsewhere, perhaps millions of years ago, and they stayed. They established themselves in Earth's oceans because oceans were what they knew, what they needed, what felt like home to them. Over time, over countless generations, Earth became home in truth. They're visitors who became residents, ancient colonists who arrived when Earth was young and claimed the deep waters as their own, existing here ever since while surface life evolved and changed and eventually produced us, blissfully unaware of the intelligence that had been dwelling in the depths all along. This hybrid hypothesis has a certain elegance. It explains the advanced technology, the space-worthy capabilities, the physics-defying performance. They brought that technology with them, or developed it over the vast spans of time they've been here. But it also explains the intimate knowledge of Earth's oceans, the established routes and territories, the behaviours that suggest long-term residence rather than temporary observation. They're visitors in origin but residents in practice, as native to Earth as anything that evolved here, with just as much claim to this planet as we have, perhaps more. The implications of this possibility ripple outward in unsettling ways. If intelligent beings established themselves on Earth long before humans existed, then human history is not the history of Earth's intelligence, just one strand among others. Everything we've built, everything we've achieved has occurred while something else watched from the ocean, perhaps curious, perhaps indifferent, perhaps waiting to see what we would do, what we would become. Every ship we've sailed, every coastline we've settled, every war we've fought on or near the water, it's all happened in full view of something that was here first and has never left. Did they watch us crawl onto land millions of years ago, small mammals venturing from the forests to the beaches? Did they observe as we learned to make fire, to craft tools, to build boats that let us cross the very waters where they dwelled? Did they see our civilizations rise along coastlines, our cities grow near harbours, our navies patrol waters that were never truly ours? And if they watched all of this, what did they think? What do they think now as we finally develop technology sophisticated enough to glimpse them occasionally, to detect their presence through sonar and radar, to begin asking the questions we should have been asking all along? We assume that first contact with non-human intelligence will come from space, that we'll detect signals from distant stars or be visited by craft from other worlds. But what if first contact happened long ago? What if we've been sharing the planet with other intelligence since before we were properly human, and we simply never knew because they kept to their domain and we kept to ours, and only now, as our technology improves and our exploration extends into the deep ocean, are we beginning to realise that Earth is not ours alone, has never been ours alone? A philosopher might argue that it doesn't matter whether they're visitors or residents. What matters is that they're here, that they're real, that the ocean hides intelligence we've never properly acknowledged. But it does matter in terms of what comes next. If they're visitors, then perhaps eventually they'll leave, and Earth will be ours again, or ours in the way we always assumed it was. But if they're residents, if they've been here for millions of years and show no signs of departing, then we need to fundamentally rethink our relationship with the ocean and with the planet itself. We've treated the ocean as empty wilderness, as resources to exploit, as territory to claim. We've dumped waste into it, harvested from it, sailed across it with the confidence of owners, of beings who have every right to be there. But if the ocean is inhabited by intelligence that predates us, that has prior claim, that considers those waters home, then what we've been doing is not exploration or industry, but intrusion. We've been building in someone else's neighborhood, polluting someone else's environment, operating in territory that was never unclaimed, just inhabited by beings we didn't recognize as peers. And perhaps that's why they've remained hidden. Perhaps they've watched us for long enough to understand what we are, how we think, how we treat things we consider lesser or merely resources. Perhaps they've chosen to remain in the depths, to avoid contact, to let us believe we're alone because they've seen what humans do to other intelligent species on land, and they have no interest in negotiating or fighting, or trying to coexist with creatures as aggressive and short-sighted as we've proven to be. The ocean is vast enough to hide in, deep enough to avoid us, and perhaps from their perspective, that's the safest strategy. Let the surface dwellers think they're alone. Let them sail their ships and build their underwater cables and drill for oil and simply stay out of the way in the deepest places where humans rarely venture, waiting for us to either mature as a species or destroy ourselves, either of which would eventually leave the ocean in peace. There's a loneliness to this possibility, the idea that we've been sending signals into space, hoping for response, hoping for contact with other intelligence, while all along there was intelligence right here, sharing the planet with us, and we never knew. Or worse, we suspected but never seriously investigated, never committed the resources necessary to find out for certain, because we were too focused on looking outward to notice what was beneath us. We've been lonely in a crowded house, calling out to distant stars while something ancient dwelled in the basement, listening to us wonder if we were alone in the universe. But there's also something profound about it. The universe is vast and cold and mostly empty. The distances between stars are so enormous that even if intelligent life is common, we might never meet it, never communicate with it, never know for certain that it exists. But if intelligence arose on Earth more than once, if the ocean harbours beings that followed a different path than we did, but arrived at similar destinations, consciousness and technology and perhaps even civilization, then we're not alone in the deeper sense. Life found ways to become aware, to think, to create, in multiple environments on one small world, and that suggests the universe might be far richer with intelligence than our loneliness imagines, not because intelligence is common, but because it's more diverse, more adaptable, more likely to arise in environments we've dismissed as impossible. The ocean dwellers, whether visitors or residents or some combination of both, represent possibility. They suggest that intelligence is not one path but many, that consciousness can arise in forms we wouldn't recognize, operating according to principles we don't understand, that the universe is strange and varied and full of ways of being that we've never imagined because we've only ever known our own. And so the question remains unanswered, perhaps unanswerable with the evidence we currently have. Are they visitors using the ocean as a waypoint, a hiding place, a base of operations on a world that interests them for reasons we don't know? Or are they residents, native to Earth's waters or established here so long ago that the distinction is meaningless, dwelling in the deep the way we dwell on land, operating in territories we foolishly thought were empty? Both answers are possible, both fit portions of the evidence. And perhaps the truth is more complex than either simple answer, something that involves multiple origins and multiple species, some visiting and some resident, the ocean hosting various forms of intelligence the way land hosts various forms of life. Perhaps what we call USOs is not a single phenomenon, but many different beings with different origins, all operating in the ocean for different reasons, and we've been trying to understand them as one thing when they're actually many, as diverse among themselves as the various nations and cultures of humanity are diverse. The ocean keeps its secrets, and whether those secrets are visitors from distant worlds or residents from Earth's own hidden places, they remain secrets still, glimpsed occasionally but never fully revealed, moving through the dark water with purposes we can only guess at, letting us wonder and speculate and question while they continue their existence in the deep, undisturbed by our theories, unaffected by our curiosity, simply being what they are in the place where they are, whether they came here or were always here, whether they're watching us or simply ignoring us, whether they're waiting for us to discover them properly or hoping we never do. What we know is this: the ocean is not empty. Something moves through the depths with intelligence and technology. Something has been there across decades and likely much longer. something that displays behaviours suggesting either long familiarity with Earth's waters or capabilities so advanced that familiarity is irrelevant. Visitors or residents, they're real, they're present. And until we commit to truly exploring the deep ocean, until we stop looking only to the stars and start looking beneath the waves, until we accept that the greatest mystery on Earth might be hiding in the one place we've barely explored, we won't know for certain what they are, where they came from, or what their presence means for our understanding of intelligence, of life, of Earth itself. But they're there, in the hidden sea, moving through waters that might be their ancient home or their chosen refuge, and whether they're visitors or residents, whether they came from the stars or from the depths themselves, they share this planet with us, dwelling in the dark below, patient and hidden and strange, reminding us that Earth still holds mysteries we've never solved, intelligence we've never contacted, questions we've never properly asked because we never believed we needed to look in our own oceans to find something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about being alone or together on this small blue world spinning through space. Chapter 7. The Old Intelligence Below. There's a quality to age that transcends simple measurement. We can count years, mark time, trace lineages back through generations, but at a certain point the numbers become meaningless, too large to comprehend, and what remains is simply a sense of oldness, of having existed so long that the concept of beginning fades into abstraction. The ocean has that quality. It's ancient in ways that make human history feel like a brief flicker. The waters that cover our planet have been there for billions of years, hosting life since almost the beginning, witnessing the entire arc of evolution from single cells to the vast complexity of modern ecosystems. And if something intelligent dwells in those waters, if consciousness arose in the deep long before it emerged on land, then we're not dealing with contemporary intelligence, with beings whose history roughly parallels our own. We're dealing with something old, something that has existed in the ocean's darkness for spans of time that dwarf our entire species, our entire genus, perhaps our entire evolutionary lineage. The implications of that age are staggering and strange, because intelligence that old wouldn't think like us, wouldn't value what we value, wouldn't operate according to anything resembling human motivations or human timeframes. We measure our lives in decades, our civilizations in centuries or millennia at most. But something that has been conscious and aware and operative for millions of years would have perspectives, priorities, and purposes we couldn't easily understand. To such intelligence, human history would be a momentary thing, barely worth noting. The rise and fall of our empires, all our wars and discoveries and achievements, would be like mayflies to us, brief lives that begin and end so quickly they barely register as significant. And yet they might watch, they might observe, because even if we're temporary, even if our entire species will rise and fade in what is to them a geological eye blink, we're still something new, something different happening on a planet they've known for unimaginable spans of time. We might be interesting the way a new tide pool creature is interesting, not as equals or threats but as novelty, as evidence that evolution continues to produce variations and surprises even in a world that seems settled and stable. Consider what it would mean to be conscious for 1,000,000 years, not to exist but to be aware, to think, to remember. Human individuals live perhaps a century at most. Our memories span decades. We can trace our history back through written records for a few thousand years, and beyond that everything becomes mythology and archaeology, fragments and guesses. But something that had been thinking for 1,000,000 years would remember things we can't imagine, would have witnessed continents shifting, ocean levels rising and falling, ice ages coming and going like seasons, would have seen species emerge and flourish and vanish into extinction over and over, the ocean's inhabitants changing while the ocean itself remained. What would such age do to consciousness? Would it make you patient beyond human comprehension, operating on timescales where decades mean nothing and centuries are brief intervals? Would it make you detached, having watched so many things rise and fall that nothing seems permanent or particularly important? Or would it make you wise in ways we can't fathom, having had unimaginable time to think, to learn, to understand the deep patterns that govern existence, the slow rhythms of the universe that are invisible to creatures like us who live such brief, frantic lives? There's evidence, subtle and strange, that suggests the intelligence in the ocean might indeed be ancient beyond comfortable reckoning. The behaviours witnesses describe don't look experimental or exploratory. They look refined, established, like protocols that have been in place for a very long time. The routes that connect trenches and seamounts aren't new paths, but highways that seem worn smooth by long use. The responses to human vessels, those careful observations and deliberate evasions, suggest experience with surface dwellers that might stretch back, not just years or decades, but centuries, millennia, watching us develop from primitive sailors in wooden boats to modern navies with nuclear submarines, adjusting to our growing capabilities while remaining always just beyond confirmation. Some researchers have noted something peculiar about the ocean's mysteries. Throughout human history, no matter how sophisticated our technology becomes, the ocean always seems to hold one more layer of strangeness, one more depth we haven't explored, one more phenomenon we can't quite explain. It's as if the mystery scales with our capability, as if whatever's down there knows how close we can look and stays just beyond that range, adapting to our improvements, using our limitations against us to maintain concealment. That kind of adaptation speaks to long experience. It suggests something that has been avoiding detection not for years but for eons, something that has learned through countless encounters how to remain hidden, how to reveal just enough to create sightings and reports, but never enough to provide proof, never enough to force acknowledgement. It's a sophisticated game, and it requires understanding not just of technology but of human psychology, human institutions, human patterns of belief and denial. You'd need a long time to develop that understanding, to watch us long enough to know how we think, how we react, what we'll dismiss and what we'll investigate. And if they've been watching that long, if they've observed humanity throughout our entire history, then they know us in ways we can never know them. They know our weaknesses and our strengths. They know our patterns of aggression and our capacity for wonder. They know what scares us and what we ignore. They've had time to study us as thoroughly as we study any other species on Earth, except we don't know we're being studied, don't know we're the subjects of observation that might have been ongoing since before we built our first boats and ventured onto water that was never as empty as we thought. There's a concept in philosophy called deep time, the recognition that Earth's history stretches back not thousands but billions of years, that the planet existed for vast ages before humans and will exist for vast ages after. It's a humbling concept, one that puts our species in perspective as a recent arrival, a temporary phenomenon in a much larger story. But we usually think of deep time as empty, as prehistory, as ages when nothing conscious was around to witness them. The rocks remember, the fossils remember, but there were no minds to experience those ancient eons, no awareness to mark their passing. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if consciousness arose early in Earth's history, not on land but in the ocean, where life first flourished? What if something has been aware, has been thinking, for not thousands or millions but hundreds of millions of years? Then deep time isn't empty, it's witnessed. And everything we think we know about the planet's history might be incomplete, missing the perspective of beings who are actually there, who watched it unfold, who remember in ways we can't imagine. The ocean is old enough to hold such intelligence. Complex life has existed in the seas for over 500 million years. That's 500 million years of evolution, of competition, of adaptation, of pressure selecting for survival and innovation. On land, it took perhaps a few 100 million years for intelligence to evolve to human levels. In the ocean, with its greater volume and diversity, with its more stable environment and longer history, why wouldn't intelligence arise? Why wouldn't something eventually evolve or develop the capacity for tool use, for abstract thought, for technology? And once it did, if it happened even 100 million years ago, that's a head start we can barely comprehend. What would a 100-million-year-old civilization look like? Not civilization as we understand it, with cities and infrastructure and visible signs of activity. In the ocean, especially the deep ocean, such things might be unnecessary. But technology could exist in forms we wouldn't recognize. Biological tools grown rather than built. Energy systems that harness ocean currents or thermal vents so efficiently they leave no trace. Communication networks that operate through acoustic or chemical means we've never detected because we weren't looking for them. Social structures that organize across vast distances without needing permanent structures or centralized locations, and the knowledge, the accumulated understanding. Imagine learning continuously for 100 million years. You'd understand physics in ways that make our theories look primitive. You'd have mapped the ocean floor in detail we've never achieved. You'd know patterns in climate and current that we're just beginning to model. You'd understand life itself at fundamental levels, perhaps having watched evolution directly, having seen species emerge and change and diverge over timescales that give you perspective we can never have. You'd be wise in ways that make human wisdom look like childhood guessing. And you'd be alien, not in the sense of coming from another planet, but in the sense of having such different history, such different experience, such different context for existence, that communication might be nearly impossible. We share no common ground except the planet itself. Your ancestors never climbed trees or walked upright, or learned to use fire. You've never breathed air except perhaps as a medium to traverse. Your senses evolved for darkness and pressure and acoustic environments. Your thought patterns, assuming you have anything like thought, developed along paths that have no overlap with terrestrial intelligence. We might look at each other and both recognize consciousness, but understanding it, relating to it, that might be completely beyond either of our capabilities. A submarine captain once described an encounter that haunted him precisely because of its strangeness. His vessel detected an object that seemed to be following them, matching their movements with precision. This wasn't unusual in itself. What disturbed him was the feeling that came with it, an intuition that something was studying them not with the curiosity of first contact, but with the familiarity of long observation, as if whatever was following them had seen submarines before, many times, and was simply checking on them the way a researcher might check on a specimen, routine and dispassionate. The captain said it made him feel like an insect under glass, not threatened, but observed by something so far beyond him that his vessel, his crew, his entire military with its weapons and technology, meant nothing. They were being allowed to operate in the ocean the way you might allow ants to crawl across your yard. Not out of kindness exactly, but out of sheer indifference born of overwhelming superiority. And the worst part, he said, was knowing that this had probably been happening for years, for decades, for his entire career. Every time he'd taken a submarine into deep water, something might have been watching, noting, cataloguing, learning from them while they remained completely unaware they were being studied. That's what ancient intelligence does. It doesn't react with surprise or hostility because it's seen everything before. It doesn't need to communicate because it's had millions of years to decide whether communication is worthwhile or even possible. It simply exists, operating according to priorities we can't fathom, pursuing goals we can't imagine, moving through the ocean with the confidence of beings who have been there since long before humans existed and will be there long after we're gone. There's a question that emerges when contemplating intelligence this old. What do they want? What motivates beings who have existed for geological spans of time, who have presumably achieved everything achievable in their environment, who face no obvious threats and have no obvious needs? Human motivations make sense in context of human limitations. We want comfort and security because life is short and uncertain. We want knowledge and achievement because we're aware of our mortality and want to leave something behind. We compete and conflict because resources are limited and time is pressing. But beings who have existed for millions of years in an ocean that provides everything they need, who have had unfathomable time to learn and achieve and explore, what drives them? Do they still have goals, or have they transcended goal-oriented existence into something more like pure being? Do they experience anything like satisfaction or curiosity or fear, or have such emotions been worn away by age until all that remains is awareness without effect, consciousness without desire? Perhaps they're maintaining something. Systems that have been in place for so long they're more like ecosystems than technology, self-regulating and self-perpetuating, requiring only occasional attention to keep functioning. Perhaps the routes we detect are not travel for purpose but habit refined over eons, movements that once had meaning and now simply continue because they've always continued. Perhaps the lights in the deep are not signals but remnants, echoes of ancient activity that persists after the reasons for it have been forgotten, even by those who maintain them. Or perhaps they're waiting. Perhaps something happened long ago, some event or decision or commitment, and they're patiently holding vigil over spans of time that make human patience look like restless fidgeting, waiting for something to return or to emerge or to change, waiting with the infinite patience of beings for whom 1,000,000 years is a reasonable time frame, for whom human civilization's entire arc might pass unnoticed because they're focused on something that operates on scales we can't comprehend. The ocean's geology tells stories of deep time, volcanic islands that rise and erode away over millions of years, subduction zones where seafloor is slowly consumed, disappearing into the Earth's mantle at rates measured in centimetres per year, sediment layers that accumulate grain by grain until they're miles thick, recording climate and chemistry across eons. Everything in the deep ocean operates slowly, patiently, on timescales that dwarf human experience. If intelligence evolved to match that environment, if consciousness arose in a place where change happens slowly, and patience is built into the fundamental rhythms of existence, then of course they would seem alien to us. Of course their behaviours would be inexplicable. We operate on timescales of seconds, minutes, hours. We make decisions quickly because our environment demands quick response. But in the deep ocean, there's no need for speed. The water is stable. The pressure is constant. The darkness is eternal. You can think for years about a decision, and nothing will change while you're thinking. You can watch surface dwellers like us rush around for entire generations and then respond at your leisure, because from your perspective, nothing we do happens fast enough to require urgent reaction. It's a different kind of consciousness, shaped by different conditions, and if it's also ancient, if it has existed in those slow, deep rhythms for longer than mammals have existed on land, then comparing it to human intelligence is like comparing a glacier to a stream. Both are water-moving, but the time frames and the forces involved are so different that they seem like entirely separate phenomena. What breaks through the contemplation? What makes the ancient intelligence in the ocean more than philosophical speculation is the evidence of continued activity. These aren't fossils we're discussing, remnants of something that existed long ago and died out. The sightings continue. The sonar contacts persist. Naval vessels are encountering these objects now, today, in our era. Whatever intelligence dwells in the ocean is not historical but present, not theoretical but active. Old, yes, perhaps unimaginably old but not gone, not sleeping, not dead. Still there, still operating, still moving through the dark water with purpose we can't fathom, and that means we share the ocean with them. Right now. Every ship that sails, every submarine that dives, every coastal city built near water, it all exists within range of intelligence that predates us by timescales we can barely conceptualize. They're there beneath us, possibly watching, possibly indifferent, possibly pursuing activities so divorced from anything we'd recognize as purpose that we couldn't understand them, even if they were explained to us. It's humbling in ways that go beyond simple recognition of superior technology. It's recognition that we're newcomers on a planet that was already occupied, that the ocean we've sailed for thousands of years and thought we were exploring has been home to consciousness since before our ancestors evolved, that everything we've done in or near the water has occurred under potential observation by being so old that our entire species' existence might register to them as a brief unusual development, interesting perhaps, but hardly significant in the context of the ages they've witnessed. Some philosophers have suggested that if ancient intelligence exists on Earth, in the ocean or elsewhere, and has never made itself known to us, that tells us something important. It suggests they've chosen concealment. They could reveal themselves if they wished. Technology that can navigate the deepest trenches and transition to aerial flight could certainly communicate with us if communication were desired, but they don't. They remain hidden. They avoid confirmation, and that choice, maintained across potentially millions of years, suggests a deliberate decision that we're not ready, not worthy, not compatible with whatever existence they've built in the depths. It's a rejection we can't even properly perceive because we don't know it's happening. We search for intelligence in the cosmos, sending signals into space, hoping for response, never knowing that intelligence exists on our own planet and has chosen not to respond, has watched us develop radio and television and internet communication, and deliberately stayed silent, letting us believe we're alone because from their perspective that's better for both of us. Contact would change us in ways they perhaps recognize would be destructive or premature. Or contact would change them, would compromise whatever existence they've maintained for so long. Either way, they've chosen silence, and the silence has held for all of human history and likely far longer. But silence isn't absence. The old intelligence below is there, in the hidden sea, ancient and patient and strange. Moving through the dark water according to rhythms we'll never learn, pursuing purposes we'll never understand, existing in ways we can barely conceptualize. They've been there longer than we've been human. They'll likely be there after we're gone, and in the meantime, Occasionally, accidentally, they reveal themselves just enough to create wonder and mystery, to generate reports and sightings and questions that have no answers, reminding us that the ocean is deeper than we know, and stranger than we imagine and older than we can properly comprehend. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it's appropriate that Earth holds mysteries we can't solve, intelligence we can't contact, presences we can only glimpse. Perhaps the old intelligence below serves a purpose simply by existing, by reminding us through their elusive presence that we don't know everything, haven't discovered everything, that the universe still holds secrets and wonders beyond our current ability to understand. They make the world bigger. They make existence stranger. They suggest that consciousness takes more forms than we've imagined, operates on more timescales than we can experience, and achieves levels of age and wisdom that we can only wonder about from our brief lives and limited perspectives. The ocean keeps its ancient intelligence hidden. The waters close over any glimpse we catch. The darkness swallows the lights when they descend. And somewhere in the deepest places, in trenches we've barely visited and caverns we've never mapped, something old continues its existence, thinking thoughts we'll never share, remembering history we'll never know, moving through the hidden sea with the confidence of age beyond measuring, consciousness beyond understanding, intelligence beyond anything we've yet encountered or perhaps ever will encounter, unless they decide in their own time, operating on scales we can't fathom, that the moment has finally come, after ages of watching and waiting to make themselves known. But until then, they remain what they've always been, the old intelligence below, ancient and patient and utterly alien, dwelling in darkness that has been their home since before our world had continents as we know them, since before ice ages, since before the ancestors of mammals crawled from the ocean onto land. They were there first, they're there still, and the ocean keeps their secrets, wraps them in pressure and darkness and crushing depth, preserving the mystery that makes the hidden sea truly hidden, truly strange, truly a reminder that we are very young on a very old planet that has held consciousness far longer than we've existed, and will hold it long after we're gone. Chapter 8. The Ocean That Watches Back. We've been descending together through these mysteries, drifting down through layers of questions and possibilities, and now it's time to surface gently, to return to the liminal space between waking and sleeping, carrying with us the strange knowledge that the world is deeper than we knew. Not just the ocean, though certainly the ocean, but everything. Reality itself is deeper, stranger, more layered with mystery than the daylight world suggests. And perhaps that's a comfort rather than a concern. Perhaps knowing that mysteries remain, that some things stay hidden no matter how much we learn, makes existence richer, makes the universe feel alive with possibilities we haven't exhausted. The ocean covers most of our world. This is a simple fact, something we learn in childhood and rarely contemplate as adults. 70% of Earth's surface lies beneath salt water, miles deep in places, dark and cold and moving according to currents we've only partially mapped. We've named it, divided it into regions and depths, claimed portions of it for various nations as if water could be owned, as if drawing lines on maps means anything to waves and tides. But naming something doesn't mean understanding it, and claiming something doesn't make it yours. Not really. Not if it was already occupied by intelligences that have prior claim measured not in centuries but in eons. Throughout this night we've explored the possibility, the evidence, the witnesses and encounters that suggest the ocean is not empty wilderness, but inhabited space. That something moves through the depths with purpose and technology. That lights glow in the darkness where lights shouldn't exist. That craft or creatures or something between the two navigate trenches and seamounts with the confidence of residents travelling familiar territory. We've considered whether they're visitors from distant worlds or ancient intelligences native to Earth's waters, and found that both possibilities are equally strange, equally profound in their implications. But beyond the specifics of any one theory or explanation, what emerges from all these accounts is a simpler recognition. We are not alone. Not in the cosmic sense of intelligence among the stars, though that may also be true, but in the immediate intimate sense of sharing the planet we call home with awareness that is not human, consciousness that doesn't think like us, intelligence that operates according to principles we don't understand and perhaps can't understand. They're here, in the water, beneath the surface we sail across and the shores we build our cities on. Hidden, yes. Elusive, certainly, but present, real. moving through the ocean while we move above it, two kinds of consciousness coexisting on one small world, mostly separate but occasionally intersecting in moments that leave witnesses changed, carrying memories of the impossible made manifest in dark water. There's something deeply appropriate about the ocean holding such mysteries. It's always been the place of unknowns, of dragons beyond the map's edge, of depths that swallow ships and leave no trace. Ancient sailors feared the ocean not just for storms and distance, but for something else. Something they couldn't name but could feel. A presence in the deep that made the water seem alive, seem aware, seem like it was watching them, even as they watched it. We dismiss those feelings as superstition now, as primitive fear of natural phenomena we've since explained and catalogued. But what if those sailors were perceiving something real? What if the ocean does watch, not with waves or currents, but with intelligences dwelling beneath the surface, observing the strange creatures who learn to cross water without being able to survive in it? The ocean that watches back. It's an unsettling phrase, but also strangely comforting. Because if we're being watched, that means we matter in some way, register as significant enough to observe. We're not alone even in our loneliness. Something out there, or down there, has taken note of our existence, has decided we're worth the effort of tracking or studying, or at least occasionally checking on. We're seen. And being seen, even by something utterly alien, even by consciousness we can't communicate with or understand, is perhaps better than the alternative of true cosmic solitude. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let yourself imagine what that watching might be like from the other side. Not from our perspective, looking down into dark water wondering what's there, but from their perspective, looking up toward the surface where light filters down in shimmering columns, where strange vessels pass overhead, making sounds that echo through the water, where creatures who cannot breathe underwater have somehow learned to traverse the ocean anyway, building floating structures and mechanical fish that descend into the depths like awkward visitors in a realm they were never meant to enter. What do they think of us? Do they think at all in ways we'd recognize as thought? Are we curious anomalies to them, or common phenomena they've observed countless times before on Earth or elsewhere? Do they watch us with concern, wondering if we'll eventually destroy ourselves or damage the ocean beyond repair? Or with detachment, the way we might watch ants, recognizing intelligence of a sort but so different from our own that empathy never quite forms? Do they have hopes for us, or fears about us, or simply catalogues and observations filed away in memory banks or neural structures or whatever substrate holds their awareness? We can't know. Perhaps we'll never know, but the not knowing is part of the mystery, part of what makes the ocean feel alive with possibility. They're down there, whoever or whatever they are, moving through the hidden sea, and we're up here, building our lives on land and occasionally venturing onto or into the water, two kinds of intelligence sharing one planet but mostly separate, mostly pursuing our own purposes in our own mediums, occasionally glimpsing each other across the boundary between air and water, between light and darkness, between the known and the unknown. The evidence accumulates slowly, over decades, over centuries. A sighting here, a sonar contact there, a witness who saw something impossible and carries that memory forever. No single incident proves anything conclusively. No one encounter provides the definitive evidence that would force acknowledgement, that would make the mystery undeniable. But collectively, woven together, the accounts create a pattern. They point towards something real and present in the ocean, something that has been there longer than we've been looking for it and will likely be there longer than we continue to exist as a species. And perhaps that's how it should be. Perhaps mysteries aren't meant to be solved but contemplated, lived with, allowed to exist as reminders that the universe is larger than our understanding of it. The ocean keeps its secrets not because we're incapable of discovering them, but because some secrets serve their purpose best by remaining secret, by dwelling in the space between known and unknown, proven and suspected, real and imagined. The lights in the deep water, the shapes on sonar, the craft that surface and descend, they're all real enough to create wonder but elusive enough to avoid confirmation. And that keeps us looking, keeps us curious, keeps us aware that the world still holds mysteries worth pondering. There are those who say we should commit resources to exploring the ocean properly, to mapping every trench and investigating every anomaly until we have answers. And perhaps they're right. Perhaps we should know what shares the planet with us, should establish contact if contact is possible, should document and study and understand whatever intelligence dwells in the depths. The ocean is our world too, after all. We have some right to know what's in it, what moves through it, what watches from below as we sail above. But there's another perspective, quieter but perhaps wiser. Maybe the ocean dwellers have remained hidden for good reason. Maybe they've watched us long enough to understand what we do to things we discover, how we exploit and study and eventually dominate or destroy whatever we find. Maybe their concealment is not mysterious but practical. The choice of intelligence that recognizes we're not ready for contact, not mature enough as a species to encounter consciousness so different from our own, without trying to control it or fear it or somehow diminish it. Maybe the mystery protects them from us as much as it protects us from unsettling truths about how alone we aren't. And maybe, from their perspective, if they have perspective, it's better this way. They live their lives in the deep water, pursuing whatever purposes ancient intelligence pursues. We live our lives on the surface and land, pursuing our own purposes in our brief, frantic way. Occasionally we intersect, creating moments of wonder and strangeness and questions without answers. But mostly we stay separate, coexisting on one planet without needing to fully acknowledge or interact with each other. It's a kind of peace, perhaps. A respectful distance maintained by mutual unspoken agreement, neither side seeking confrontation, both content to let the other exist in their own domain. The night is deep now, and you've travelled far in thought and imagination. We've descended together through layers of mystery, through sightings and theories and ancient possibilities, down to the deepest questions about what shares Earth with us and what it means to be aware in a universe that might be richer with consciousness than we've ever imagined. And now, as sleep approaches, as your thoughts begin to drift and fragment in that gentle way that precedes dreams, let all these mysteries settle into your mind not as problems to solve, but as stories to carry with you, as reminders that the world is strange and beautiful and full of things we don't understand. The ocean is out there right now, covering most of the planet, moving in the darkness, cold and deep and patient. And somewhere in those depths, perhaps something is moving too, following ancient routes between trenches and seamounts, glowing softly in the absolute darkness of the abyss, thinking thoughts we'll never share, experiencing existence in ways we can't imagine, being alive in forms that blur every category we've created to make sense of consciousness and intelligence and the nature of awareness itself. They're there, or something is, and whether they're visitors or residents, whether they came from the stars or evolved in Earth's own waters, whether they're watching us or ignoring us or simply coexisting without particular interest in surface dwellers who cannot survive in their realm, they make the ocean deeper, they make the planet stranger, they make existence feel less lonely because even if we never meet them, even if we never communicate or understand each other, they're there. Intelligence beyond our own exists. Life takes forms we haven't catalogued, and the universe is not empty of awareness, not sterile and cold and dead except for our one bright spark of consciousness, but alive in multiple ways, rich with minds that think and perceive and experience reality through lenses so different from ours that comparison becomes meaningless. As you fall asleep, let yourself imagine that ocean, not as empty wilderness but as habitat, as home to something ancient and strange. Picture the darkness that has never known sunlight, the pressure that would crush any surface creature, the cold that numbs and slows everything it touches. And then picture light in that darkness. Not much, just a glow, distant and soft, moving slowly through the water, following a path it has followed for perhaps millions of years, going somewhere or coming from somewhere or simply existing in the movement itself, which has become purpose enough after so long. And as that light moves through the deep water, as it navigates trenches and rises over seamounts and descends into canyons that have never been fully mapped, imagine it's aware. Imagine it knows the ocean in ways we never will. Imagine it carries memory of ages we can't comprehend, wisdom earned through experience measured in geological time, understanding of the universe that makes our brief insights look like children's guesses. Imagine it's old beyond measuring and patient beyond understanding and strange beyond anything our categories can capture. And then imagine it's real. Not imagined, but actual. Not fantasy, but fact hiding in the depths we haven't explored. Down there now, moving through the hidden sea while you sleep in the world above. Two kinds of awareness existing on one planet, mostly separate but connected by the simple fact of sharing space and time on this small world, spinning through the void. The ocean that watches back. It's a phrase to carry into dreams, a reminder that we're seen even when we don't see back, that the universe notices us even if we're not sure it does. That consciousness exists in more forms than we've met, more places than we've looked, operating according to more principles than we've discovered. And that's beautiful in a way, isn't it? The strangeness of it, the mystery, the fact that even on our own planet, in the waters that cover most of its surface, unknowns remain. Intelligences dwell that we haven't contacted. Lives are being lived according to patterns we don't recognize. And all of it goes on whether we believe in it or not, whether we search for it or not, whether we ever find proof or simply carry suspicion and wonder to our graves. Some will say none of this is real, that we've spent this night exploring fantasies and misidentifications, that the ocean holds only known creatures and natural phenomena, and the rare unidentified contact that will eventually prove to be submarines or whales or instrument glitches. And perhaps they're right. Perhaps the rational explanation covers everything. Perhaps there are no mysteries in the deep, no ancient intelligences, no glowing craft moving through the darkness, no consciousness watching from below as we sail above. But perhaps they're wrong. Perhaps the ocean holds exactly what witnesses have described, what sonar has detected, what sailors and fishermen and submarine crews have encountered and reported and carried with them as memories that don't fade, as experiences that change how you see the water, how you think about Earth, how you understand your place in the universe. Perhaps the mystery is real, and if it is, if something does dwell in the hidden sea, then we are fortunate. Fortunate to live in a world still strange enough to surprise us. Fortunate to share a planet with intelligence beyond our own. Fortunate to have mysteries worth pondering, worth preserving, worth carrying into sleep and dreams. The water is deep tonight, deeper than charts show, deeper than instruments measure, deep in the way that only mysteries can be deep, holding layers and secrets and possibilities that numbers never capture. And in that depth, in the darkness miles below where you lie comfortable and warm, something might be moving, following ancient paths, pursuing ancient purposes, being what it has always been in the place where it has always dwelled, old and patient and strange, aware in ways we don't understand, alive in forms we haven't named. And if it's watching, if the ocean truly watches back, then perhaps as you sleep it sees you too, marks your existence in whatever way such beings mark things, knows you're there in the world above, dreaming your brief human dreams in your brief human life. And perhaps, in whatever passes for thought in mind so different from ours, it wishes you well, hopes you survive and flourish in your strange surface existence, watches over you not as guardian but as fellow consciousness sharing one small planet, where life found multiple ways to become aware, to think, to wonder about the universe and its mysteries. Or perhaps not. Perhaps it doesn't think of you at all. Perhaps you're too brief, too small, too different to register as significant. Perhaps it simply exists, moving through the ocean according to patterns set down before your species evolved, indifferent to surface dwellers, focused on purposes that have nothing to do with humanity or anything we'd recognize as purpose. Perhaps the watching is entirely in our imagination, our need to feel seen projected onto darkness that holds only alien life pursuing alien goals in alien ways. Either way, it's there. Or something is, in the hidden sea, moving through the depths while you dream above. And that's enough. That's everything. The knowledge, or the suspicion, or the hope that we're not alone, that the ocean holds more than water and salt and known fish, that somewhere in the darkness, intelligence exists, that consciousness takes forms we haven't met, that the universe is stranger and richer and more alive than daylight suggests. Sleep now, let these thoughts dissolve into dreams the way salt dissolves into water, becoming part of something larger, losing their individual shape but remaining present, changing the medium they enter. Dream of deep water if you dream at all. Dream of lights moving in darkness. Dream of ancient things being patient in places humans cannot go. Dream of the ocean watching back, of awareness in the abyss, of intelligence in the trenches, of consciousness dwelling in forms we have no names for, existing in ways we can't imagine, sharing the planet with us while remaining forever hidden, forever separate, forever strange. The mysteries remain. The ocean keeps its secrets. And somewhere in the hidden sea, in the deepest places where pressure turns water into something almost solid, where darkness is absolute and eternal, where cold and silence reign in ways surface life can never experience, something dwells, old beyond measuring, patient beyond understanding, strange beyond all our attempts to explain or categorize or comprehend. They're there in the depths, you're here in the light, and between you lies all the mystery that makes the world worth wondering about, worth exploring, worth preserving with its secrets intact, because some things are more beautiful unexplained, more meaningful unproven, more valuable as questions than they ever could be as answers. The ocean that watches back, the hidden sea, the mystery in the depths. Let it all fade now into sleep, into rest, into dreams where the boundaries between possible and impossible dissolve, where you can swim through dark water breathing easily, where lights glow around you in patterns that almost mean something, where ancient intelligence regards you with recognition, or indifference, or curiosity, and where you understand, in the way you understand things in dreams, that the world is exactly as strange as it needs to be, and you are exactly where you belong, and the mysteries are perfect as mysteries, and the ocean holds exactly what it should hold, and everything is as it was always meant to be. Good night, sleep well, and dream of the deep.